Good evening all and welcome. Can you hear that? The stuff going on in the background? Well, that's the reason there's a compilation today. Because there's no way I can record with this amount of noise outside. There's some work going on out front and it's outside my control. And after having a nice distance chat with the workmen, I was informed they will be here until the evening. So I hope you enjoy the compilation, guys. I'll consider this one the first one of the week and just have one on Sunday probably. We'll see how it goes. But for now, get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I want to start off by saying that I am someone who suffers from an overactive imagination. I tend to see things that are just not there, or being sensitive to certain noises. I tend to think this is due to me having Asperger's, and move on. But this was entirely different. I live on the top floor of an apartment that I rent from my family where I live by myself. It's nice to receive the independence that I yearned for, and it helped me come out of my shell by getting me back into exercise, cooking, and genuinely going out and about with my day with a wider and happier stride. I've always loved horror, as well as tabletop games, although I am a self-professed coward, and tend to make a good impression with people I meet thanks to years of growing, therapy, and helping me find myself. I moved into this apartment in the winter of 2007, and when moving, I noticed that the apartments opposite were empty. I spoke to my parents, who said they never saw who used to live there, but whoever it was soon moved out and were never seen from again, only to be visited by bailiffs which have since stopped. The place has already made me uncomfortable, as I had to face away from that door to unlock mine. The lock on my door was broken for a while, meaning I had to be very specific with how I unlocked it, or the key would end up being jammed. I would always feel eyes burning at the back of my neck, looking behind me, only to see the same white door, my eyes leading up to the peephole. I remember once staring at that peephole for a whole 5 minutes, looking for any subtle changes in light. I'm quite a big guy, 250 pounds at 6'1", but there was a feeling that made me feel like I was 6 years old again. Each time I passed that door to number 13, I could swear that I heard noises coming from within. Footsteps, quiet arguing, and even the door jiggling. Each time something like that happened, I felt my soul dying just a little bit more. I soon caught myself unlocking my door and entering my safe haven to get lost in books, video games, and other stuff. At my job, I tend to work later sometimes if I need to speak to a team in America, or if I just cannot face waking up early. I work for a large firm as an analyst, although I wouldn't want to get into much detail regarding that, and since it was bang in the middle of winter, it would tend to get dark at around 4:30 to 5. I would walk down the public driveway and look up to my apartment, but only to notice that the blinds next door were shut. I don't remember if they were always shut, as I never focused on it, but it immediately felt off, as if you were looking at a puzzle, only to notice in the right center that a piece was missing. I climbed the stairs leading up to my door, lost in thoughts because I was having a particularly bad time at work during then. I was staring at the steps in front of me before I found myself on the same landing, but this time something felt off. I could smell something was off. I immediately thought it was just rubbish from downstairs, and that was yet to be collected. But there was something different. The air felt heavier, almost colder as I approached the door. There was a smell of rotting meat that I had never noticed before. I knelt down by the door, letting my backpack to the side as I leaned against the door. It was from there. There was a smell. My mind raced, as I could not immediately pin what on earth was causing it. I laid on my front and tried to look under the gap, only to immediately start gagging, almost vomiting as I keeled back. I gripped the carpet, rolling away and knocking over a couple of things as I clenched my fists. It was the smell of death. Have you ever smelt a dead animal? A fox on the side of a path that is rotting. You can see its ribs slightly poking out as maggots writhe and squirm in the decaying flesh. It was that smell. I stared through the gap, only to be met by pitch black. I could have sworn that I saw something pushed to the side, but I didn't want to stay there any longer, and I darted up and retreated inside, calling my dad to tell him about it. It wasn't too long after that, perhaps a day or so, when I heard that the building manager had went into the property, and that was it. Nothing else was said about it. No one else could tell me what happened, or they did not want to. I thought I saw a look in my dad's eyes when I questioned him, and all it beckoned me to do was to shut up and accept that sometimes answers just don't give you closure. I never knew what happened behind that door, nor would I ever wish to know. I don't know if my mind is playing tricks on me when I get a nasty shiver race down my spine whenever I look at the painted oak door, treating whatever was there as a gentle facade, much like how some wear a mask to hide what is behind their own eyes. I sometimes swear I can still smell it, whatever it was. I sometimes think that someone was dead, but I don't think I will ever know or want to know. In early 2007, I was freshly 18 and newly married, living in Fort Polk, Louisiana, while my husband was training at Fort Benning. I was born and raised in Alaska, so living in the continental US was a vastly new experience for me. My husband had a weekend off, though he was not allowed to leave the base, so we bought a Greyhound bus ticket for me to visit him and meet the soldiers he became friends with. I had never been on a Greyhound bus before, but I was excited to drive through the South and see new places and have my own little adventure. Sure, plenty of creeps bothered me on the bus and at the stations, but I still had interesting conversations, met new people, and generally enjoyed the experience. Regardless of the time, each station we stopped at was open and offered food, outlets for charging, and bathrooms. So when we arrived in Columbus, Georgia at about 2 a.m., I expected the station to be open. It wasn't. Everyone else who ended their journey there had a ride waiting for them. And suddenly, I was alone outside a locked building in the middle of downtown Columbus, full dark and terrified. I didn't really know what to do, and my phone was nearly dead from the long last leg of travel. I thought about walking to a gas station, but I had no idea which direction to go in, and I couldn't see any nearby lit buildings. I truly expected the station to be open, thinking I would stay there for a bit while my phone charged and I had something to eat, and could have access to a phone book so I could call a cab. All I had was an old sign hanging on the side of the building with incomplete phone numbers for taxi companies. The numbers had faded, been scrapped off and defaced. There was only one complete phone number, and it was handwritten in Sharpie at the top of the list. Better than nothing, right? Wrong. I called the number, and a guy answered, casual and sleepy, asking who I was. I apologized, explaining I was trying to call a cab, when the guy perked up immediately and said, "Oh yeah, that's me. I'm on my way." My phone died 10 minutes after I made the call, and it was another 15 minutes before the guy showed up in a traditional-looking yellow taxi. I noticed the cab wasn't marked. No logo, number rates, anything. But it had that taxi light thing on the top, and in my young, naive mind, seemed totally legit. He waved me over. I got in, and asked him to take me to Fort Benning. Finally, feeling some relief. The doors auto-locked, and I will never forget the first thing he said to me. He was silent until we got onto a main road and said, "Did you really think it was a good idea to call a number written in Sharpie?" I froze. In retrospect, no. It wasn't the best idea I'd ever had. But I had so few options, and I didn't want to be stranded in a huge foreign city in the middle of the night. I don't know what else I could have done. After a minute, I tried to laugh it off, and hoped he didn't notice I was shaking. I reached for my phone, remembering it was dead, and realized that if something happened to me, no one would know that I even made it to Georgia. Staring at me in the rearview mirror, the driver told me what was going to happen. "There's no use getting to Benning this early. The Post Hotel isn't even open. Drive around with me for a while. Hang out, and I won't even charge you." I told him no thanks, that I really needed to get to Fort Benning right away. "Nah," he said, and that was it. We drove to a worn-down apartment complex, where he told me he was picking up a regular to keep me company. I didn't reply. What could I even say? I wasn't raised religious, but I was praying to God for some kind of miracle. Out came a woman, who looked a bit like a cliché prostitute. Tube top, miniskirt, smudged mascara, and an unlit cigarette hanging from her lips. Short but ratty bleached hair, pockmarked face, cheap purse, and I have no idea who or what she truly was. But she got in the front passenger seat and lit her cigarette. She turned to me and said, "Don't worry, he's cool. We're cool." Okay. That definitely helped. I had never considered jumping from a moving vehicle before, but even if I wanted to, the back doors were child safety locked, and I couldn't open them. Trust me, I was trapped like a cage animal, just waiting to die. I felt so stupid, so foolish, sitting in the back seat of a cab with no idea what to do and no idea what was going to happen to me. I kept trying to rationalize it, downplaying the situation in my mind. I was too afraid and frozen to actually do anything anyway. As we were driving around, the girl was telling me about the driver, how he was ex-military and had just started this cab business. What a down-to-earth, fun guy he was, and how lucky I was to be picked up by him. How I was cute and young, and everything was cool, cool, cool. Her words were a bit slurred, and I knew she was either drunk or high on something. I didn't really want to know. We pulled up outside a small blue house sometime later, an hour before the break of dawn, and the driver told the girl to keep an eye on me while he went inside. I'm in full-blown panic mode, the suspense of it all making it so much worse. The girl offered me a cigarette to calm my nerves. I wasn't a smoker, but I said yes. She got out of the cab and opened my door, stumbling a bit before sitting on the curb and lighting another cigarette. She lit mine, and I sat next to her. and I started thinking about whether or not I could outrun her with my heavy backpack, and how long the driver would be inside for. Without me asking, the girl told me the driver was inside showering in preparation. I asked what he would be showering and preparing for, but she kept repeating how he was cool, and how much fun we were going to have, and how cute I was. Then she said ranger cab, because he was like a ranger or something, or maybe that was his dad. He's a good-looking guy, military muscles. God finally answered my prayers when the girl slumped over and passed out on the grass. I saw the track marks on her arm and guessed heroin. And apparently, the driver was inside taking a shower and wasn't about to come back in the next few moments. I grabbed my backpack and ran like hell. I don't exactly remember what happened after I started running. I know I took off as fast as my feet would carry me, and that I didn't dare stop to catch my breath. 1 minute I was sprinting for my life, lungs on fire, and then I was trudging along with tears in my eyes as I walked through the Fort Benning gate with my military spouse ID, asking how to get to the base hotel. Honestly, I wish I knew how I got there. I was in deep survival mode and didn't stop to process any of it until I made it to my room. I don't know if someone gave me a ride, if I followed a map, or what. I never blocked a memory out like that before or ever again. I told my husband everything when I finally saw him. He didn't believe me. I probably wouldn't have believed me either. His lack of trust made me think no one could take me seriously, so I never went to the police. I still had the number I dialed saved on my call history. I knew the girl called it the ranger cab. What I didn't have was the confidence or support to report it. Sometimes I think back to that day and wonder what would have happened if the girl did not let me out of the cab, and if she hadn't have passed out on the ground, and if the driver had never stopped for a shower. It's one mystery that I do not need the answers to. Ever since I can remember, my mother has suffered from explosive anger episodes. Not a day went by without her blowing up at my father or me. As my father spent most of his time at work, I typically took the brunt of her rage. It often became so intense that the noise would set off the dogs barking. As a child, what I could never understand was how my mother could act so resentful one moment, and then at the same time show so much affection. From ages 3 to 10, my mother would regularly show her love by coaxing me to suck her breasts and lean my face against her belly or mon pubis. I can still recall the salty, humid scent, and it makes my insides liquefy. Every day she insisted on dressing me, keeping me in bed with her each night, and soothing my genitals and anus with a cream, even when I assured her I wasn't sore. I wondered if her comments about my developing breasts and an abnormally large size of certain lower parts will ever really lose their impact. My mother is also a very primal person, taking to biting our female dog's ears to, as my mother puts it, asserting her role as the alpha female. After one particularly nasty fight following a school-recommended appointment with a counsellor for chronic stomach aches, my father scolded me for embarrassing the family in disclosing clinical names of the female genitalia with the male therapist. Evidently, the most concerning aspect of my use of these terms was the fact that I used the word clit, something that the counsellor had found odd for a 6-year-old to know, given that the sole purpose of it is for pleasure. When my father approached me about my inappropriate behaviour, I was sitting naked in a bathtub, That was the only time I tried to tell my father what was going on, and he walked out on me, stating that my mother was the best mother anyone could ask for. After all mothers are surely nurturing and incapable of any nefarious activity. It was the night that my parents began to stealthily make love beside me in bed that I finally put my foot down and requested to sleep in my own room. Several years later, when I was about 11, I had retired to bed after a day of my mother giving me the cold shoulder after a blow-up. Evidently, I had forgotten to lock my bedroom door, and someone crept in. I could see my mother's outline against the light from the window. She made her way to the bedside, leaned down and proceeded to lick me all over my face and neck. I remained paralyzed until finally the moist onslaught stopped and I assumed she retreated. Though I didn't recall her leaving my room, in the morning she was gone. Now that I'm an adult, I keep as much distance as possible from my parents. Even during our last family vacation, following my college graduation, she barged into the bathroom while I was changing and commented on how I was growing a nice bush. Not like the hookers who always shave down there, she said. I moved out and into my own apartment not long after. Fortunately, as far as I can tell, my parents treat my much younger sister in a very normal fashion. Even on the rare occasion that I do visit to spend time with my younger sister, I make sure never to sleep under the same roof as my mother. This happened on Halloween when I was about 11. My friend and I decided to go trick-or-treating. Yeah, we were a little old, but we just wanted some free candy. I lived in a very nice neighborhood. One of those ones where everyone gives you the full-sized candy bars, so it wasn't unusual to have a lot of people come there for trick-or-treat. However, that also meant that there's about an acre of front yard for each house, so it took about 3 minutes to walk between each door. It was a good night for Halloween weather-wise. Not too chilly, not too rainy or anything. This is important later. So it's approaching 8:30 p.m, and after hanging around on the golf course and appreciating our candy haul, we decide to start heading home and call it a night. The street I live on is a gigantic U-shape, like a little over a half-mile walk from the top of the U, down the bend to the other side. We were walking towards the end of the U, further from my house, as we wanted to take the long way, since it was such a nice night. It was about 9 p.m. now, so no one else is really out anymore at this point, and people turned off their porch lights, the universal sign for no more trick-or-treaters. That's when we notice a lone white van parked on the street. We made a joke about how it looks like the stereotypical kidnap vans with the painted windows. That's when we notice it shift out of park and slowly creep down the streets towards us and park at the next house. Oh, they must have kids trick-or-treating. It wasn't uncommon for people to drive their kids from house to house, since they were so spread out in our neighborhood. But given that it was 9 p.m, and with nice weather, it struck me as a bit odd. We checked every few minutes, and it seemed to just be stopping from house to house like normal. We turned around again, and kept walking at a leisurely pace, gossiping and whatnot. That's when we hear the car squeal, as it moved forwards down the hill and park again. This time, only about 2 houses away from us on the opposite side of the street. Again, weird time to trick-or-treat, but whatever. That's when we realized there were no kids getting out of the van, not once. Now this was before my first phone, a red and white Samsung Propel since it was 2008. We were only 15 minutes from my house, but a bit disturbed, so we walked to the nearest door and rang the bell, and stuck our bags out in an attempt to act normal. A woman opens the door just a crack and proceeds to berate us for trying to trick or treat at this hour, and then slams the door before we could even say a word. Okay, thanks, lady. We turn around, and the van is right there, parked in the wrong direction, on our side of the street. The windows are tinted so we can't even see the guy driving. Trying to keep our cool, we casually walk away from the door and up the street to the cul-de-sac loop that's on the side of the street that makes up the bigger U. If you cut through the loop and hop a couple of fences, you can end up at my back door. The van goes the same way. Now we know he's following us, since there's no reason for him to go up these side streets. We break into a sprint, and I am by no means athletic, but I hopped those fences like an Olympian. We run inside my house, lock all the doors, and freak out while we sit on the front hall. Not 5 minutes later, the van slowly drives down the street past my house. We stress eat our candy and think of what could have happened if we had not have been aware of our surroundings. This happened when I was 7 years old, and it has stuck with me throughout my life. The only people I've ever told was a girlfriend years ago and another friend who I no longer speak to. Other than those two, I've kept this encounter private for obvious reasons. I was playing a game with my father and sister in the living room of our home. My grandmother was there too, sitting and watching. The game was that my father would lay on his back, lift his feet, and tuck them into a squat, so my sister or myself could sit down on his feet, and he'd push us off, and we would leap into the air and land on our feet, laughing. I remember giggling hysterically and saying, "Higher!" And so he pushed off harder, and I must have lost control and went higher into the air, and came down wrong side up and smacked onto my head. It shook the house. My grandmother was upset, and I stood there as everyone got to their feet and surrounded me. It was in that moment when you're shocked and not going to cry, but it hurt, and you're stunned, before you realise what happened and finally started crying. It ended up being a concussion. My father was told not to let me sleep and to watch me closely. My head, in the weeks that followed, swelled out like a big egg. But it was in that moment, right after the impact and before the crying, over on the table next to the sofa, were standing two little blue men, no more than 10 inches in height. They seemed to stand tall, or rather proud, like warriors. Their legs and arms were thin. I could see their mild knobs of knees and elbows. There wasn't much fat on them. They were both very lean, and I could make out a slight muscle tone too on their bare chest and arms. They were both wearing grass skirts, like something you'd see out of primitive native tribes, but the grass seemed wet, like seaweed, and had a bit of a soppy squish lake bed look about it. One of the men was wearing a hat, like an old-style cap, darker red in colour, almost like wine-coloured. The other one I could see his hair more clearly and was long and unkempt, with pieces coming down his face and over his ears. The one without the hat was holding a long spear in his hand. The base of the spear was resting on the ground, and the pole came up to almost his full height, with a pointy stone carved at the top. It was a fast momentary image, and the scene in the living room quickly turned to panic after I hit the floor and my family crowded around me, and once I began to cry, I never saw the two little men again. But I never forgot that image. It felt like they had been there longer than just the short moment when I could see them with my eyes. and there was something sinister feeling about the way they confidently stood there and stared at me. It was clear that they were not afraid of me, or the fact that I could see them. At the age of 7, as this was in the 80s, all I could compare them to were like evil Smurfs. The one's red cap even reminded me of Papa Smurf, but they weren't shaped like Smurfs, and that's where the comparison fell short. I've always been good at drawing, and at one point a few years later, I tried to draw them because I was afraid I might forget what they looked like and their details. I'm not really sure what happened to that drawing. On a final note, warp ahead to the early 2000s. I started Googling it, to try and find more info on the little blue men. I uncovered a picture of a painting from hundreds of years ago. It looked like an illustration of a book or something, on some academic website. Little blue men tearing apart a library and causing mayhem. I think it was called The Blue Men, or something like that. In red caps, and they had the same stature and build. They were so strikingly similar to what I saw, that's when I actually had the nerve to tell the story to one of my friends. Since then, I've never been able to find that picture online again. All I ever find now are the Blue Man Group and other unrelated things. I get the feeling that they don't want to be found. Has anyone else ever seen anything like this? I grew up in a small town in Texas. We lived in such a small town that everyone knew each other, and even if you didn't know someone's name, that at least their face was recognizable or familiar. Also, I grew up with 3 other siblings, and we would all walk to and from school together. At the time of this memory, I was a young 7-year-old boy, and I remember it clearly being an intensely hot day. For reasons I can't recall, I was walking home alone that day, which was highly unusual and rarely ever happened. We didn't live too far from the school, but we could take certain tucked away routes that we perceived as shortcuts. This particular route was occupied by just a few houses, and most of them were empty. So it was usually a very quiet, inactive area, with little chances you would even encounter cars driving by. I remember thinking it was so hot that day, and my backpack was so heavy, and I couldn't wait to get home. Halfway to my house, quietly out of nowhere, I hear a car slowly driving behind me. After walking for a while, I finally turned around to see it was a small black car, and I could barely see that there was more than one person in it. Being a very shy and anxious kid, I tried to ignore it and keep walking, but it continued to slowly trail behind me. Part of me thought that this was all a prank. When my family first moved to this small town, we would get teased a lot for being the only Asian family in town. After what seemed like the longest and most awkward minutes of slowly being followed, I started to feel uncomfortable. So I stopped walking and stepped further aside to see if they would just eventually pass me. Even at the time of this happening, I never thought I was in danger, because this small, quiet town was known for being very safe, and like I said, everyone knew each other. The car then slowly drove up to me and rolled down the passenger window. There were 3 young men in the car. They weren't teenagers and looked to be in their 20s. I remember being caught off guard by not recognizing any of them, which was very strange for this town. The guy in the passenger seat then said with a smile, "Hey, do you need a ride?" Still being ignorant and not sensing any danger, I thought it was so tempting, because it was so hot outside. Regardless of actually wanting to get in the car, I just said, "What?" He began to repeat, "Do you want to ride?" Then the guy in the back seat of the car began to open the back door and let me in as he grinned at me. Once again, even though I actually wanted a ride home, I just said, "What?" All three of them smiled and chuckled. The man again said, "Do you want to ride?" with a smile. At this point, I was so embarrassed and anxious, once again I just said, "What?" The silence in the background was interrupted by the sound of a screen door opening in the distance. I could see a familiar elderly woman just looking at us from her door. Looking back, I think she did this to let them know of her presence and possibly scare them away, because this was obviously a very sketchy scene that she was witnessing. I turned back to look at the men. None of them was smiling anymore. They all looked serious. The guy in the passenger seat said so seriously and abruptly, "Get in the car." It almost felt like a scowl. I felt like I was being put on the spot and could feel a strange sense of urgency. So naturally I became even more nervous and once again just said, "What?" I then hear the woman's screen door shut, and the elderly woman was now standing on her porch, making her presence even more evident. The men were all clearly very annoyed, and the man in the passenger seat just said, "Forget it," as the guy in the back seat shut the door and they quickly drove off. Still being completely oblivious to the danger of the situation, I remember thinking as they drove off, "Dang it, I could have gotten a ride home," which is both funny and scary to think of today. I then turned to the elderly lady on her porch, and she gave me a gentle smile, and I shyly smiled back and continued to walk home. It was years later that I realized how shady of a situation this was, and I'm so grateful to the old woman who practically scared those strange men away. I was so close to willingly getting in their car, and if she wasn't there, who knows what these men could have done when they lost their patience. It gives me chills today to think of what may have happened if I got in the car with those strangers. So thank you, kind elderly woman, and to the three strangers in that black car, let's not meet again. This story is from a few years ago, probably 2009 or 10. I was in college, and I used to drive a little manual two-door. It had a back seat, but if you were over 5'6", it was basically impossible to sit comfortably. I was walking out of a big box store one night, and there's this disheveled woman in hysterics outside. She's claiming that her boyfriend took her paycheck to go get high, and now she can't get home. "Well, where's home?" I asked. She answered that it was a town that was probably 20 minutes away, but for me, it wasn't that far out of the way to help a random crying lady. During the car ride, she acts more and more fidgety, and tells me about her history of drug abuse and her abusive druggy boyfriend, and how she probably won't be able to pay rent and everything like that. Meanwhile, we're driving out to a more and more secluded part of town, and the drive is taking longer and longer. About halfway through the drive, she mentions that she also has a host of mental illnesses, schizophrenia, bipolar, and now I'm beginning to wonder about the truth to her story. But whatever, that explains the fidgeting, if she's just got done with a panic attack, adrenaline and whatnot. Finally, after 40 minutes of driving, we reach a house with no lights and no cars there. as she told me she lived with her kids and her mum. And she starts to fumble around and hand me money for gas. I told her not to worry about it, because my mileage is fine and she needs to pay for her rent. She hesitated then, and I'm not sure if she hesitated because I was not accepting the money, or if she was thinking of doing something else. But I was alone in the middle of nowhere, near an empty house. I turned my GPS on with my directions to home to indicate I was leaving. Pretty quickly, she got out of the car, went into a completely different direction away from the empty house, and into the woods. I never saw her again, and I'm not sure if she was just scared, or if she was trying to lure me out into the middle of nowhere for whatever reason. A part of me hopes she was really just coming down from a panic attack after getting left in a parking lot by her abusive druggy boyfriend, and that she was just jittery because of that. But while it was happening, I definitely started getting a feeling that something was not right. I thought about it before, and considered that my manual transmission, my GPS having phone, which is less common in a college town in 2010, as most of my friends still had flip phones, or something else changed her mind about doing anything weird to me too, if she was considering it. But hey, at least it was a relatively happy ending there. This happened to me when I was 10. I grew up in a military family and lived in the Middle East for a significant portion of my life. Because of this, we frequently travelled to different countries because of the low cost and proximity. On this particular vacation, we flew into Cairo, Egypt, the kidnapping capital of the world at that point in time, for a long weekend. We only lived about 2 to 3 hours away, and it was a late night, and we were staying at the Marriott Hotel, which had a taxi/shuttle service that was supposed to pick us up. For some reason, our driver never showed, so we were forced to find regular taxis to take us there, which took forever that late at night. We finally found one that was offering us a pretty good deal. They don't run by meters, instead they just give you flat rates that they choose, and headed towards the hotel. Out of nowhere, another taxi basically T-bones us in the middle of the road, causing us to stop. There aren't really defined roads in a lot of Arab places, so it isn't really that surprising that we got hit. In Arab nature, the true drivers get out of their car and start yelling at each other, and that it was each other's fault, and looking like they were going to throw hands. Eventually they got back into their respective taxis and parted ways. My family and I were completely taken aback. We had been in Egypt for less than 2 hours and were already having quite the adventure. We finally got to the hotel exhausted. It must have been 3 AM at this point, and our driver helped us get our bags out and get settled, and told us that he felt so bad about the car accident that he offered to pick us up the next morning and take us to the Great Pyramids, which was on our agenda for a super cheap rate. My parents agreed and decided on a time for him to come, though I can't remember when. Fast forward to the next morning. Everyone is ready for the day, excited to see how crazy it was going to be. Our driver was outside waiting for us, leaning against the car like someone in an old movie, right when he said he'd be there. I'm a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl that had a deep tan at the time, and being in Egypt, that was a rare sight. When the driver saw me in the daylight, he gave me the creepiest, most unsettling look that sent chills down my spine even as a 10-year-old. I knew something wasn't right with him. Nonetheless, we got into his taxi and headed towards the pyramids. He continued to try and talk to me and joke around with me the whole ride, something I found to be extremely creepy and bold since both of my parents were in the car. We get super close, and there's an entrance that people can go through and walk the long distance to the pyramids. And there is an entrance taxis can use to go through. You have to pay to see them, strange but true, and our driver keeps making jokes about my blonde hair and blue eyes, and bringing up that he could get me into the pyramids for free, so my parents wouldn't even have to pay the extra ticket price. We laughed it off, and my parents paid him and said thank you, and began to exit the taxi. I don't remember how it happened, but at some point after I got out of the car, he did too, and directed me towards his trunk. I was confused and thought we had forgotten something, so I stayed behind as my parents walked towards the gate to get whatever I thought we had left. The driver pops the trunk, and there wasn't anything in there. He grabbed my arm and put a hand over my back, trying to push me into the trunk, and said, "I'm getting you in for free," over and over again, as I resisted. Naturally, I freaked out and screamed out to my mum and dad at the top of my lungs, terrified. When they heard me and noticed I wasn't behind them, they started sprinting back to the car. When the driver heard me scream, he immediately let go of me, closed the trunk, and drove away, just as my parents started to run to me. I was crying my eyes out, terrified out of my mind, knowing that an Arab taxi driver tried to put me in his trunk and drove away the second I screamed for help. It's scary to think what could have happened if he'd been stronger and more prepared, or faster. He's the reason I'm still terrified of taxis, Ubers, lifts, and of any car service of that nature. This happened when I was a teenager, around 14 or 15 in high school. I had a boyfriend at the time who lived a fairly short walk from the school, and we would often walk to his place after school ended and hang out for a few hours before I went home. Because we took the same route so often, I knew all the houses and landmarks on the way. In January, I live in the north so the winters can be pretty cold and snowy, my boyfriend and I started to notice a car that had been parked in the same spot for quite a while. We thought nothing of it at the time. Maybe the car had died in the cold and whoever owned it couldn't afford to have it repaired. But as spring came and the snow melted, the car was still there, parked in the same spot at the end of my boyfriend's street. We passed it almost every day as we walked there after school, and as the days grew warmer, a rotten stench started to rise from the car. I joked to my boyfriend, "I bet there's a body in the trunk," and we laughed it off. But we were curious, so one day we peered inside the car's windows as we passed. The car was messy, but not filled with trash or food. A discarded backpack lay across the seat, and papers were strewn here and there. It looked just like an ordinary car, except we knew that it hadn't moved for months, and the smell was indescribable. The smell continued to get worse as the spring turned to summer. One day, when I couldn't come over for some reason, my boyfriend and his dad decided to investigate the car. They found the doors were unlocked and the keys were inside the car. That was pretty strange. They went around the back and popped open the trunk. My boyfriend told me that a swarm of black flies flew up from inside. The smell was definitely coming from the trunk. Inside were a bunch of black garbage bags. My boyfriend and his dad called the cops at this point. The cops later told us that inside those bags was rotting meat, cut into pieces. The first pieces of meat they tested belonged to a pig, but a few weeks later, my boyfriend's dad got another call. Under the pig meat were the bones of a human child. Whoever left that car sitting unlocked with the keys inside was obviously hoping the car would be stolen. It still gives me the shivers. I live in a major city, in practically the pit of hell state. Born and raised here. I am very familiar with my surroundings. I'm also aware to the fact that my city is one of the worst hubs for human trafficking, and living here can be very, very dangerous. Despite all this, I've taken pride in knowing that I do everything I can to remain as safe as possible. I've had close calls before. Shady landlord gives a stranger copies of my keys, and a man tried to enter as soon as I was alone. And other horrifying tales, and consider myself an avid murderino. I'm pretty prepped. At the time, I had 2 things of pepper spray. One in my favourite jacket pocket, and one velcroed to my desk at work. I also had 2 trusty pocket knives, one always on me, one in my car pocket door. Oh, and my taser never leaves my bag. I avoid shady situations, and despite being a small lady, I know my stuff. Yay for self-defense. My point is, I'm a very paranoid small chihuahua, and I still get into scary situations. Now on to the story. It's summer, and hot as hell. I've got a date with my favourite gal pal, and I swing by her place to pick her up. She tells me she had a job interview to go to first, and I agree to go with her. No big deal. She's a sweet, tiny thing from a small town in the Midwest, and very new to city life and the wild things that can happen here. As we drive into a different city, I ask her about the job. It's a modelling gig. Oh, cool, for who? I found an ad on Craigslist. It's just sports clothes. The Craigslist thing sets a small, distant alarm off in my head, but I push it to the side. Where the heck are we going anyway? When we pull off to a Starbucks a bit outside the city, the alarms in my head become a little less faint. Relax, I tell myself. I've gone to legit job interviews in coffee shops before. There's always been a good reason. We arrive first, late still, but end up waiting about 15 minutes. Kinda weird, but Kat's relieved we're not the rude ones when she gets a text saying he's here. I look around the Starbucks and outside the parking lot, trying to figure out who the mystery man could be, when I notice a tall, well-dressed man step out of a black SUV. He smiles at us, and he approaches, and I figure that's our guy. I could have sworn that SUV had been parked there for a while. I asked Kat if she wanted me to step in line and grab her a drink, but she practically begs me to stay with her. Okay, I can do that. I don't think it would look very professional, but I don't protest. The man named Jack leads us to an isolated table outside, and doesn't say much about my presence, other than it was okay for me to be there. I get on my phone and shoot a text to my fiancé explaining where I am and what I was doing. He shoots back a "be careful" all in caps, and I sit there pretty to watch the show. Jack had this strange accent that I couldn't place my finger on. Looking back, I'm not even sure it was real. He starts asking Kat the usual questions, and I notice she's absolutely bombing the interview. She doesn't have much experience and didn't bother to bring a portfolio. But despite this, he doesn't seem to care. The alarm in my head is much louder than a whisper, but it completely blares when he asks if she'd be comfortable doing lingerie shoots as well. Dear sweet Kat says she doesn't have an issue with it, but would prefer to mostly do sports clothes like they had discussed earlier. She asks to see some of his work, and he pulls up a lingerie Instagram. All lingerie. no clothing at all. He holds it in front of her face and pulls it away immediately, and when she asks if there was more she'd be doing, Jack goes, "That was it," and hurries the conversation along. He says we need to go right now to his studio at a place he briefly mentioned the name to sign papers and get everything squared away. It had to be done today. He's not working tomorrow, and his co-workers will not do it right. I absolutely hate everything about this, and I'm trying to glare some sense into her, but nothing is getting through. Kat agrees, and he turns his attention to me. "Do you want to be a part of this too?" I immediately know that nothing about this is professional. I look down at my beat-up docks and green cargo pants, and shirt that has flames and a slightly edgy logo on it, and I can't help but scoff. That's not really my thing. I'm just the ride. He studies me for a few seconds and then says we can all ride with him, directing his attention to Kat. "No, I don't want to leave my car. We'll follow you." He looks offended that I butt in, but asks where we parked. "Right in front of the store." I got it. I pull Kat up to the Jeep and make sure we walk behind him. As soon as we get into the car, I lock the doors and try to keep from freaking out. We are not going. This doesn't feel right. What about the lingerie? Everything I say she has an excuse for. We pull out of the parking lot and I follow Jack's SUV. But the whole time I'm trying to figure out how to get out of this. Kay doesn't like the lingerie. But this could be a door for her, she says, and she desperately needs the money. What if it is legit? He was alone anyway. You have your knife and spray, right? Of course I do. But I'm 5'2", and this man's 6'3", and Jack could very much have friends. And I wouldn't want to possibly kill or be killed. I realize Kat is batshit. We drive along as I try to talk to her, and start driving out into the desert, the middle of absolutely nowhere. There's a divider in the road that prevents U-turns, and I get an eerie feeling that Jack knew to take us this way. I'm absolutely desperate at this point. I pull out my phone and snap a picture of Jack's SUV license plate. I upload it to Snapchat, where friends can see it. And Kat starts getting uncomfortable once she realizes how far we've driven. The name of the place he mentioned springs back into my head, and I know it's familiar from somewhere. A commercial jingle that's distant but catchy. It's a restaurant or hotel or something. He wouldn't have a studio there. Please just look it up. So she does. It's a casino. Unless this man had rented out a space, he wouldn't have a studio there. It's not consistent with the information he gave us. Kat is freaked out at this point. I tell her that this isn't uncommon, and that he was trying to confuse us the entire time. Throughout the entire interview, she had a confused and hesitant look on her face, like this wasn't what she was promised or expecting at all. Kat finally agrees that we need to get out of there, and I start to breathe easy again. I notice that every 5 minutes or so there's a break in the medians. It's a rough, quick stop and turnaround, but I'll have to do it. So I do it, and we absolutely gun it. Kat gets a call from Jack, and she ignores it. I convince her to call back, and she gets nothing at all, like the number had blocked her. It didn't go through. I tell her to take a screenshot of the Craigslist ad, but she can't find it anywhere. It's like every trace of Jack had disappeared. We go back to her apartment, and I tell her that she needs to report it. She promises she will, but later, because she doesn't want her husband to know. He didn't even know she had this interview to begin with, and she didn't want him to know what happened. If I hadn't have driven her, she would have gone alone, without telling a soul, and who knows what would have happened. I tried not to scold her too badly, but I just reminded her that our city was very different and much more dangerous than where she's from. Sweet cat, I hope you're a little more awakened to the world, and I'm sorry for that. It's been a few months since we split ways, and I'm worried over all the oblivious, crazy things that you get into. Since the incident, I now have 3 pepper sprays, 1 for the car, and a new pocket knife to carry around. Thanks, Dad. She's gorgeous. I'm almost 4 months pregnant, and now finally ready to get out of this damn dangerous city. Please, 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 dear listeners, be safe out there. It's such a scary world, and be damned careful with Craigslist. Jack, if you're really the scary guy my gut deemed you to be, I hope we never meet again. When I was roughly 11 or 12, our family cat, that we had had for a really long time, was somewhat sick. Not really sick, I guess, just obviously getting a little too old and was clearly not going to live much longer. This cat was a big deal in my family. My dad loved this guy to death and was so close with him. His name was Mac, and he was black with white paws and a white chin and belly, and he would, apparently, sit outside my door when I was a baby while I napped, and wouldn't let any visitors come into the room. Once I was old enough, he would let me sleep in my bed where I napped. He slept with my dad probably just about every night for the 15 years or so we had him. Very close with the family, basically. I ended up going to a birthday party one night when Mac wasn't doing well. It was a sleepover at a hotel, and all my friends were going, so I felt as if I couldn't miss it. I had recently gotten this little rubber black cat from the dentist, as my dentist had a box of cheap toys and candy that you could pick something out of after your appointment. I got the toy because it reminded me of Mac, and he was sick at the time, so I thought I should take it to the sleepover with me, since I was leaving him for the night. Well, me being the stupid kid I was, I took it with me and played with it in the pool and all over the hotel. Easily could have lost it, but I was pretty sure I still had it by the end of the night, and had put it back in my bag before going to sleep. The next morning I woke up, and got a call from my parents on my friend's parents' cell phone. I asked them how Mac was doing, and they sadly told me he had passed away the night before. I was extremely sad, and the rest of the kids tried to comfort me, as well as 11-year-olds can, and I ended up going home with my other friend at the party, as my parents were working on something by then and couldn't pick me up. When I got to the house, I looked in my bag for my toy, since I was super sad and wanted something comforting, and couldn't find the thing anywhere. I emptied the whole bag, which had a total of about 5 items in it, and it was gone. I cried because I knew I must have left it at the hotel somewhere, and was not going to get it back. Obviously not a huge deal, but my cat just died, and the toy that looked like him was gone too. So too much for an 11-year-old me to handle. I went home later in the day, and forgot to unpack my bag. When I went to sleep that night, I had this really strangely realistic dream that I was sitting in my living room with my dad, and Mac just strolls into the room like cats do. My dad said something like, "Mac, you came back," and was really happy and petting him, and I was so confused how it was happening. When I woke up, I had a weird feeling that just seemed to be telling me to get up and to walk into my parents' room. I walked in there, and my little black toy cat was sitting right on my mother's dresser. I was like, wow, super weird that I had just had that dream, and then found this again right after. I wonder where my mum found it. When I asked her about it, assuming that she maybe unpacked my bag and found it in there somehow, she had no idea what I was talking about, and didn't even recognize the toy. She said she hadn't unpacked my bag yet. So, not that scary, more kind of cute. I still do have the toy at home though, although I'm not exactly sure where. But I couldn't throw it away, because coincidence or not, I always saw it as a goodbye to me from Mac, since I wasn't there to say goodbye. When I was 8, my family decided to take a summer vacation and take us to a big famous water park a couple of hours away from home. It was me, my older sister who was 11 at the time, and my little sister who was 5, and my uncle who is paraplegic, and his girlfriend. We get to the water park, and my uncle and his girlfriend end up staying at the cabinas at the very entrance of the water park, due to the fact it was the only place with shade, and he had no intentions of getting in the water with his wheelchair. So they let us go off on our own all day. Big mistake. Since there were only either single or double person tubes, my older sister decided to get on one with my younger sister and let me go on one alone, but just hold on to theirs. And that worked for a little while, but we got to the lazy river that went around the whole park, and at the end of the river, they made it like very fast and crazy with waves crashing into you and stuff. I ended up letting go of their tube and flipping out of mine. By the time I even realized I had lost them, I thought it was no big deal, and that I would just find them soon enough again. So, I'm trying to get back onto my tube, and for some reason I just can't do it. A man notices me struggling and decides to come and assist me. I finally get in and thank him and try to float away, but he hasn't let go of my tube. Instead, he starts talking with me and asking me why I'm alone. I explain that I lost my sisters, and he suggests that he gets on the tube with me because he doesn't want me to get lost or drown. I say, okay, and we get on a tube together. He starts forcing me to ride all the slides with him, and talks to me about how his hotel room is not that far, and he has a whole bunch of toys I would love to play with. I actually started getting really interested, because I don't have many toys, and the ones I do have are broken from my sisters. He says that we can get on one last slide, and we can head over there after. I agree. While waiting in line, he starts acting really giddy and weird. He keeps swimming under our tube and would play with my feet and legs, and told me they were pretty. There was a young couple behind us who was watching all of this unfold, and I guess they could see the discomfort in my face, because they tapped on my shoulder and asked if I was okay and if I knew the man. He tried answering for me, but they cut him off and said they were talking to me. I reassured them that I was okay, but it was seeing the look on their face that made something click in my head, and say that whatever was going on with this man was not okay. Once we got off the slide, I told him that I had to go, and once we got to the opening of the river, I wanted to just get on a single tube by myself, because I needed to find my sisters. He tells me that I can't do that, and he needs to watch me, so I can't leave him. As soon as he said that, This fear just came over me, and I ducked out of the tube and started swimming. When I looked back, he was right on my tail swimming after me. I ended up swimming to the entrance of the river and got on a single tube which he ended up grabbing and flipping me out of, saying I needed to get on a double tube with him. I did not feel safe anymore, so I ended up running out and running to my uncle and his girlfriend. I didn't tell them what happened, just that I got tired of being in the water. After sitting there for a while, I saw no signs of the man, and thankfully, my sisters made it back to the cabina safe and sound as well, and we all left together. This actually happened a little less than a month ago. It was 2 a.m. and I was bored, so I went out to this park a bit out of town to go biking. It's, for the most part, surrounded by trees at all ends, with a running/biking track that goes around the park. The park was lined with streetlights throughout, so you could vaguely see. I'd been going there for a few times that week, around that time, because it unwinded me, and it felt good to be outside. But this time, when I was making my rounds, I see 4 6-year-old looking figures coming out the forest. It was between 4 to 7 of them, but these little things didn't have any parents with them, and they all just seemingly stayed silhouetted. I was kind of biking in their general direction, and they started coming at me. Thankfully I was around 200 feet away from them, but I could make them out, and the spooky little kids were coming. I don't think I've biked faster in my entire life. I literally became Lance Armstrong with an extra testicle for a good 3 minutes. It was unexplainable. I've been alone and haven't seen a single person all the times I went, and I haven't gone since, needless to say. This happened at school when I was 4 or 5. I remember that I spent the day at the zoo with the rest of the class, and we were returning to school on the bus. So the bus finally stopped 3 or 4 meters away from the school doors, and everyone got off the bus to join the class. It turns out that I was the last one leaving. Even the teachers had left. So I was about to enter the school's playground when a woman got out of her car and called me right in front of the open school doors. "Hi, sweet boy. Do you want to go to the zoo with me?" At this moment I had a weird feeling. I knew something bad was happening. How could this woman know I went to the zoo? And why would she ask me to go with her? I couldn't think. I was paralyzed. And she kept inching closer. When she was about 2 meters away from me, and she walked up to me, I felt a strong grip on my wrist and got heavily pulled into the school ground. I looked up and saw my teacher, even more scared than I was. She looked like she was going to cry. She ran into the school as fast as she knew I could run without looking back. Today, I still don't know what this weird woman wanted, and if she really followed me since the zoo. But whatever. I hope to never encounter her again. Last December, a little before Christmas, my friend and I arrived home after our final exam. There's a little red light at a major intersection up ahead, and I begin to slow down. I came to a complete stop in the right/sidewalk lane of a 4-lane street, 2 in each direction, facing southbound, with 6 cars in front of me, and I'm stopped with a side street to my right. Suddenly, I hear tires screeching in a crash. I got hit, rear right of my car, by another driver. We get out, exchange information, and begin to take pictures of our respective vehicles. I look up the street to make sure I have a few hundred meters between myself and any vehicles approaching from the north before I step into the left southbound lane so I can get a picture showing the angle of both of our cars and the street signs, which are rear right/northwest intersection off the side street. My friend calls me over to unlock the trunk so he can get his paperwork from his pack to write down his witness statement. And just as I step back into the right lane my car occupies, a northbound driver, who was so occupied with observing our collision, drifts into the left southbound lane, which I just stood in, and misses me by about a foot. He was travelling at roughly 70 kilometers an hour. That's roughly 43 miles per hour. 2 days later, I go paintballing with aforementioned friend and a few others. In between games, you go into the lobby with your mask off, and everyone is supposed to put their paintball marker gun on safe and have a barrel cover over the muzzle. I'm leaning against a wall in the lobby when a previous friend asks me if he can borrow money to buy more paint. My back is still leaning against the wall, but I lean to the right to hand him my wallet. As I put my hand there, I hear a loud splat against the wall I'm on. I look to find a paintball fired to where my head/eyes would have been had I not moved. Somehow, one of the kids across the room was putting his marker down on a table, and the barrel's cover retention bungee snapped, allowing the cover to fall off. The safety broke, and the marker fired around. A paintball in the eye at 250 could have been a game changer to say the least. 2 days later, I'm out drinking with the friends I went paintballing with, and some others. We're walking down a major street, and I'm naturally a fast walker. So every 25 meters I'm stopping, turning back, and waiting for everyone to catch up. At one point, I look back and see everyone is still pretty far back, but it's cold and we're practically at our destination. So instead of stopping to wait, I decide to just keep walking ahead. Then, for some reason, I decide to stop and shout back to them that I'll meet them inside. Just as I do so, I hear a loud engine roaring up the street and turn to see a speeding Porsche 10 meters in front of me hit the west wall of a building literally at a right angle, so hard that more than half of its engine compartment caved in. The airbags deployed and the windows all shattered. Had I kept walking without saying anything to my friends, I probably would have been in between the car and the building. 2 days later, it's Boxing Day morning, and I was out a few times throughout the night because I was excited to go pick up some items with my friends. The same one from the collision because I was excited to go pick up some items with my friend. The same one from the collision/paintball/night out. At one point through the night, I have a nightmare of sorts. The earliest part of the dream I can remember is me leaping out of a panel door van with a rope in my hand. I have no idea why, but in the dream in my mind I knew that someone was trying to kill me. As my feet hit the ground, I find myself in my driveway. I run inside the house, and for some reason, tie the rope to the front door's doorknob, knowing that on the other end of the rope, the killer is tied to it. I lock and barricade all the doors and windows and call 911. The operator tells me every officer is busy with something and no one can help me. I hang up the phone. I'm about to call someone else when I notice the rope has been cut. Trying to stay silent and listen for the killer, I suddenly notice that everything that can possibly make a sound in the house is given a kettle, stove fan, toilet, shower, TV, radio, everything. I look up at the top of the stairs and see someone's foot hit the first step and start walking down the stairs. I wake up screaming and sweating, and the first words out of my mouth before I can even think to process it as a dream are Slender Man. This story isn't actually about me, but my mother. We lived in Michigan, right in the border of Ohio, so it only took a few minutes to travel to Toledo. Our hometown was kind of a podunk middle of nowhere, so we would have to go to Toledo for any shopping. One day, she went out to this strip mall kind of area, very sketchy but also busy, so there wasn't ever any real reason to worry. She's on her way into a store, my baby sister at the time in tow, and this red panel car pulls up right in front of us, blocking her path to the front door of Target. They slide open the door and asks if they want to sample their perfumes. My mother is 90 pounds soaking wet and way too polite for her own good. She smiles and politely refuses and continues to walk into the store. On her way out, she's walking back to the car. The goddamn panel van and the dirty old couple block her path to the car and slide their door open again. Want to sample our perfume? This time my mother doesn't answer and proceeds to walk around the rear of the vehicle. The man puts it in reverse and the woman asks again, "Want to sample our perfumes?" My mother immediately starts dialing 911 and the van peels out. The operator had said that they had calls multiple times today about the van and that there were reports of them kidnapping people who would actually sample the perfumes. This story to this day still scares the crap out of me, not only for my mother's safety, but for the safety of my infant sister she had it with her at the time. Needless to say, I don't think she wants to meet them again. When I was about 7, my two brothers and I were playing in an area that was used as an unofficial motocross place. We decided to dig a tunnel for some reason, being the extra smart guys we were. It took a few hours to dig about 6 feet in and 2 feet high. I was right up at the face when suddenly the tunnel collapsed. It was all dirt with no supports. The world went instantly black and hot, and I mean hot like a furnace. I couldn't move a muscle from all the weight of the soil completely enclosing me. I started to really panic, as you do. Everything started turning red, which I guess was blood being forced into my head. Every breath was getting harder as the soil constrained me more and more. Even though my hands went in my face, I couldn't move my arms to clear the dirt around my head, and also started breathing in dirt, which made me cough, which made me contract my stomach, and then I couldn't draw breath at all. This isn't what made me panic though. The total darkness turning red, with the incredible heat, made my young mind think I was going to hell. I don't know how long I was buried for, but it seemed like an eternity. Suddenly I felt someone grab my feet. My brothers had been frantically digging through the collapse to pull me out, and managed to reach me and get me out of there. We never told my parents. I just went home and got hosed down. I was 14 when this happened. I had a pretty solid weeknight routine. I would go to practice, come back at around 8:30, and then ride my longboard about a mile down the road to a local Walgreens. I did this so I would have snacks for my inevitable late night of Xbox I had ahead of me. One night, I got home a little late, so I left at 9. I had been in my new, less sketchy neighborhood for about a year now. I usually ride on the road, but my gut told me to stay on the sidewalk. I hadn't even made it to the main road yet, and I heard a car behind me. It slowed to pace me. I had a feeling that something was about to go down, so I tested the guy. I stopped and did a 180 extremely casually, gave my board a little push, and looked over my shoulder. He's reversing. Crap. I dip, fast, picking up my board and go full sprint. I didn't want my cause of death to be wheel bite. I get about a block away and jump into some bushes next to our house, and I waited there for no more than 30 seconds before I heard a car slowly rolling towards me. They pass and turn right. I get out of the bushes and make a stupid move. I go to double check to see if they're gone. I dart across the street and peek around the corner. I see their brake lights, then I see the white reverse lights come on a second later. You've got to be kidding me. I run back around the corner at God's speed, realizing my only chance is to get onto the main road. There's too much traffic there for this guy to do anything. So, I sprinted there at full speed. I figured I got to top speed, and he would have to run me over to catch me. He can't stop his car, get out, and jump me if I'm running at top speed. I made it there, losing him at some point along the way. I don't know when. I never looked back. As it turns out, there had been multiple attempted kidnappings in that area that month. Back when I was in college, about 7 years ago, I had to move from an apartment to another last minute. Because, well, I was a lazy college student and hadn't made any other plans. My parents were in town, so we were looking for something quick. Luckily, we found something pretty cheap and somewhat nice right off the front of the university. They were thrilled. I was just happy this was over. So I move into this kind of 4-room basement which was already furnished. They said the last tenant cancelled last minute, and I only needed it for the 3 months of the summer, so he was giving us a fantastic deal. The first room was the main room, which consisted of a living room and a little table to eat. Immediately on the right of it was the kitchen and then the bathroom. The bedroom was on the left, and there was some kind of weird and small hall/connection joining it to the living room. Since the start, I always felt kind of uneasy about the bedroom for some reason, and preferred to sleep in the living room, since there was already a comfy sofa bed in there, and there was no windows in the bedroom. Throughout the semester, I felt countless times that someone was watching me from that bedroom, when I was alone, watching TV, or playing video games. It was a weird and eerie feeling, to the point where I preferred closing the door leading to the bedroom altogether. I wasn't home that much, and sometimes I slept at a friend's, but every time I came back, it felt like I wasn't alone in that apartment, and there was never any sounds or sights, just a strange feeling. I spoke of it to my friends and they laughed, since I was never the superstitious kind. So I kind of brushed it off the whole time, and thought nothing of it when I finished the semester. I just moved on with my life. About 2 years ago, one of my friends from college texted me. "Hey, is the door number you lived at in that creepy basement back at uni 14? I was like, yeah, why? He then sent me a picture of an old local newspaper page. He had been through them at the library, looking for a picture of him back in his college football days. In it was the obituary section from 2009. The picture of a young and good-looking female student. Next to her picture was the picture of a door and a dress, which I recognized very well. She hung herself in her bedroom closet. I come from a chaotic upbringing. I was born and raised as a child in South Korea, and I later moved to Australia with my mother, having lost my father in a homicide. The next few years of my life in Australia were difficult. Meeting and making friends was difficult in the early noughties, particularly since I was quite nerdy and didn't speak much English, something most Australian kids at the time did not relate well to. One of the scariest moments from my life was when I was aged 12. At the time, it did not even occur to me how close I came to potentially losing my life. My mother and I were on a road trip heading south from Melbourne to stay on the southern coast. We had stopped one evening at a small, well-kept caravan park. The caravan park was quaint and beautiful. Neat grass, nice flowers, frangipanis blooming, and a small creek which ran along the edge of the premises. It reminded me of home. I spent some time walking around on my own, as my mother was taking a nap. I discovered a game and pool room. I went outside and spent probably a good hour playing pool by myself, and generally just mucking around when a young boy came in. I was very shy, and so was he. But we eventually talked for a little while and became friendly. I do not remember playing any games with him, but I do recall him being pretty nervous. He kept asking me if I wanted to go back to his caravan, as his parents were making dinner soon. At first I was not interested, and said no. We spent some more time doing things and talking as it got later. He became pushy and asked if I liked cakes and lollies. I said of course. That much I do remember clearly. I followed him to his caravan, which was much older than ours and quite dilapidated. He asked me to wait outside while he talked to his parents. I waited patiently for a few minutes until the door opened, and a larger, older man with glasses and no shirt opened the door and asked if I would like to come inside for cake. I was scared, but I remembered feeling like I had to, like it would be rude of me to leave. As I was walking in the door, I heard a man behind me shout, "Hey, what's going on here?" I was quickly grabbed from the collar of my shirt and pulled inside. The man then quickly tried to lock the door behind me. However, the stranger was too quick and burst into the door and took my hand abruptly and pulled me outside, and we frantically ran away. The man asked which unit room/caravan I was in and took me there right away. We went inside and my mum yelled at him asking why he was there. I was hiding in the corner crying while he explained what happened. We packed up and left immediately. I was already heavily on anxiety medication after what happened back home, and we never spoke about it alone again. My mother claimed it was something I should talk to my therapist about. Every time we all spoke about it, my mother would leave the room. It scared the hell out of her, and I did not really understand why. I guess at that age it's difficult for the brain to comprehend the reality/potential of the situation. Looking back on it now, it utterly scares me to the point of losing sleep. I've been sleeping in my room lately because I need a new bed desperately, and all of this occurred on my couch. My living room is a small square, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet. I have a really comfy black leather sectional couch, and a TV stand, and a flat screen TV, and a coat rack, all in my living room. I sleep on the end of the couch, where I can see the TV, and straight through the house to the kitchen while lying on my left side. At the time, my 14-year-old son would sleep on the other end of the couch, so I wasn't alone or afraid, and I'm not easily scared. The first night I woke up, eyes wide open, but I could not move my body. The only thing I could move were my eyes, and I could hear and see all around me. When I woke up, standing right in front of me was an almost completely black figure that stood maybe 4 feet tall. Imagine the Muppet Beaker, but all black with white eyes and black pupils. This is why I question if it was just a dream. So as soon as I'm aware of it, Shadow Beaker knows I am awake and looks at me as it contorts its neck so that its body is still upright, but its head is now completely upside down. Surprisingly, I looked Shadow Beaker in the eyes and conveyed to it, non-verbally, that I would kill it, and it just vanished, and I was able to move freely. I think that I pissed something off, because the next night, I was lying in the same position on the couch, the same as the night before, when I became aware of my surroundings. I also found that I couldn't move. My 14-year-old son, or what I thought was my son, was standing at the threshold between the living room and the dining room. He didn't look right, so I moved my eyes to the right to see if my son was still on the couch sleeping, and he was. So I moved my eyes back to where this look-alike was standing, and as I caught sight of it again, it crouched down in the way a primate would when they are about to take off running. It moved towards me, still crouched down, and when it gets to the couch, it jumps over me and leaves my line of sight. I moved my eyes in the direction it went and could not see it, but I could feel what felt like very hot breath on my ear and side of my face. It was as if someone had their face right up next to my ear and was breathing very heavily. So I thought the words in the name of Jesus and was able to move again. The next night, I was lying on my stomach, but my head was slightly hanging off the couch with my face towards the floor. When I became aware of the room around me, there was a small person in a long white dress and floppy white sun hat rubbing the back of my head in a soothing way. Although they were small, I didn't get the impression this was a child. I was not afraid and didn't feel threatened, but I also didn't trust it. The thing is, I don't remember how I got out of this one, but after a few minutes I could move again. Finally, when I became aware on the last night, I was practically sitting straight up with my back against the armrest and my legs on the couch. I know for a fact that I laid all the way down on the couch to go to sleep. Also, it felt like there was something trying to choke me from behind with one hand, but the strangest thing was that I didn't feel a human hand. I'm still trying to figure this one out, honestly. The best description I can give is that it felt like 3 long fingers, 2 wrapped around the left side of the back of my neck and 1 around the right side. The grip kept getting tighter and tighter until I was feeling like I couldn't breathe. In my head I began to think, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. And I became able to move. As I regained movement, I screamed out the same thing, and I was released or woke up or whatever, and I haven't had another experience like that since. I think I was dreaming, but those experiences seemed so real. Can anyone help shed some light on this, or point me in the right direction? I am a 19-year-old male, 5'9" and 160 pounds, scrawny, middle-length red hair, and a large beard. I am by no means attractive. I work at my local Walmart on the fresh cap team, which basically means I stock all the fresh areas like produce, meat, deli and bakery, which is where I met a man that I wish I had never met in the first place. His name was John. John was a fairly large man, about 6'2", overweight, and probably weighed about 225 pounds. He was probably in his mid-50s or early 60s, and was very, very strange. At first, he seemed like a fairly nice man, liked to chat, would ask questions like how my day was, just casual conversation. I thought nothing of it, just a co-worker trying to be nice, or so it seemed. His questions began to get a bit more personal. Things about school, home life, and I shrugged it off as him just trying to be friendly. But then he asked me if I had a girlfriend. I told him that I was single, but didn't see myself in a relationship anytime soon. Let me re-emphasize that this man is easily 40 years older than me, so this question came off as more than a little creepy. He said, "Oh," and carried on working before I shrugged it off once again. No harm, right? Boy, was I wrong. John liked to sing. He wasn't very good at it though. He would constantly sing strange old songs, and sometimes he'd even sing old cartoon theme songs. He also made odd comments and other small things. At first I thought he was just a little quirky, but then it escalated. One time I watched him stare at a couple of little boys for a considerable amount of time, before he finally got back to what he was doing. I thought perhaps he was just envious of how young and lively they were, and wished to be that young again. Once again, I had no idea of how wrong I was. One day I came into work, like any other day. It was a nice day outside, so I didn't really want to be at work, but oh well. My supervisor told me that I needed to cap the bins, which basically means I needed to take inventory of what we have and pull anything that we needed to stock off the shelves onto a cart and onto the floor. A lot of this requires a ladder, as the shelves are quite high, and once again, I am not very tall. I'm on the top of the ladder, with my earbuds in, just doing my job, when I turn around and notice him staring at me. It almost seemed like he'd been staring at my ass. I pulled out an earbud and asked him if he needed something, but he just turned around and walked away. He said nothing at all. Why was he staring at me? I felt kind of violated, but I figured I must have been mistaken. So I got back to working again, and the rest of the day went by as normal. The next day, John came to work and walked right up to me. In one quick breath, he told me that he had written a song for me. My thoughts were clearly written on my face. I barely even knew the guy, and he wrote a song for me? He ignored my confused look and began to sing. I don't remember what exactly the lyrics were, but to sum it up, basically the song was about how I was his ray of sunshine. I was thoroughly creeped out. Thanks, I said, not able to hide my confusion and disgust. You didn't like it? He said, seeming surprised. Sorry, I barely even know you. That's kind of creepy, man. You're also way older. He said he thought I was gay, and I told him that I was bi, but I wasn't interested in him at all. That made him really angry, and he went off on a rant, yelling about how I came onto him, and that he was reciprocating my feelings for him. What? Everything I had said to him up until this point had been completely professional. The only thing I had done was answer some of his strange questions. He stormed out of the store, fuming. I went to my supervisor and told her everything that happened. She doesn't take harassment lightly, and helped me file an official complaint against him. When he came into work the next day, she took him off to the back, and I'm not sure what she said, but she fired him, and he walked out of the store and walked past me, giving me the most deadly glare I'd ever seen in my life. I was glad that he was finally gone from my life, but you guessed it, I was wrong. I was having a normal day at school, and my classes ended. I was walking out of the building talking with a friend, when John walked up out of nowhere and started yelling at me. Oh, crap. I forgot that I told him where I went to school. He said he knew I was in love with him, and to just come clean and admit it. You were just a co-worker to me, John. I don't have any feelings for you. Please leave me alone. This made him even angrier, and he came at me, threatening to kill me. My friends backed me up, and we managed to get him on the ground and under control, while we called the cops. When they showed up, I explained everything and they arrested him. As he was being dragged away, he threatened to kill me and my family. I pressed charges against him for harassment and assault, and when they investigated a little further, they found out that his home computer actually had indecent pictures of young boys, some even underage. All of them seemed very amateur, as if he had taken them himself. Being told this made me sick to my stomach, and made me feel even sicker still to think of what might have happened if my friends hadn't been there to help me when he assaulted me. I can't even begin to imagine. Turns out, he had already done some pretty horrific things to these boys. He was sentenced to life in prison for a slew of charges, not limited to harassment, assault, kidnapping, and so many accounts of possession of indecent images that I can't even remember. It made me feel good to know that he would be off the streets. It's taken a long time to put the metaphorical pen to paper. Everything that I'm about to recount to you is true and happened to me and some very close friends. I think it's best to start at the beginning. During my freshman year of college, I'm not ashamed to say that while prepping for it, I was incredibly lazy. I mean, super lazy. I knew that I had to sort out my digs, somewhere to stay, but was one of those people that just said to myself, it'll sort itself out. Of course, it didn't. I tried my best to sort stuff out a few days before I left, and at the last minute managed to find someone to split with. It was a reasonable sized apartment, and we had a pretty good time for the first few weeks, and generally no issues. The only reason I say this is because the person I was bunking with had a good friend, and we all became very close friends in a very short space of time. The lady's name in question is Terry. She was the sweetest little thing, and she lived not too far from us, about a 15-minute walk up the road. It was a quiet little spot, her place, but she always seemed tired when we'd go in for classes. I'd ask her if everything was all right, and she'd say that she just didn't sleep well. As I became more invested in our friendship, I started pushing her to tell me more about why she couldn't sleep, and one day she told me. She said that she has weird dreams while sleeping there, that sometimes she'd wake up in the middle of the night and it would be like she was pinned to the bed and wouldn't be able to move. At the time, both of us had never even heard of sleep paralysis, so we couldn't exactly coin the phrase. She did mention that when she went home for Thanksgiving, it seemed to go away, or when she slept over at her boyfriend's house, but only when she was sleeping in her bed, in her room, did she feel that way. This put a light bulb in my head and gave me an idea. Now, my major is physics, so I love all things experiments and testing out theories and the like. I had a theory that if I perhaps slept in her bed, the same thing would happen to me. Although I'm going to be honest, I really didn't believe it. I didn't think it'd be anything supernatural, to say the least. I just assumed that the bed must be super uncomfortable, positioned in a bad way, or something like that. Truth be told, I'd never even lied in it, so this would be a fun experiment. I told her that with her permission, we could do a bed swap. She'd come and sleep over at my place, and I'd go sleep over at hers, and we'd see how we both felt. We both had classes next morning at roughly the same time, and agreed to meet at lunch to talk about how we felt. The deal was done. We exchanged our keys, and we went on our way. I arrived to her apartment, and had a nice little time watching TV before I got ready for bed. I looked from the doorframe down to the ominous-looking bed. The bright pink sheets really didn't give it an impression of impending doom, and without much thought, I tucked myself in. I closed the curtains, tucked myself in, and passed out. At about 4 a.m, note, the only reason I know this is because her alarm clock is fully visible from the place you sleep at. So, I woke up, and I had the strangest sensation come over me. I can barely put it into words, but I couldn't move. It was like my whole body was paralyzed. I could move my eyes. I didn't even think my mouth worked. I just lie there, in the dark, staring at the ceiling, assessing what the hell was going on. That's when my eyes slowly moved down to the doorframe, the door that I had left wide open. And there, in the hallway past the bedroom, was a shadow. There was a streetlight right outside the window of her living room, a window which I hadn't shut the curtains to. I was staring at this, a strange shape looming ominously in the back. I wanted to blink. I wanted to know if this was a figment of my imagination, but I didn't dare look away. I was completely terrified. The fear was getting to me, and I was starting to understand why she'd come to school tired. I assumed it was just a dream, a waking dream. I didn't know what to call it, but I was sure that this must be in my head. Surely this can't be real. That's when the thing moved. I don't really know how to describe its movement. It was like smoke moving through a room, only the smoke is a whole shape that travels completely without leaving any smoke behind. It moved and pulsated, almost like a living, breathing smoke creature. It approached the doorframe. It was very noticeable, as the absence of light moved from place to place, gliding silently across the room. I remember listening intently. It made no sound. All I could hear was the background hum of the occasional car, and her fridge freezer, gently humming, but definitely there. This thing approached even closer, and it got to the foot of the bed, and kept on going through the bed. That's when it became on top of me. I could feel its appendages reach down and push into my arms and legs. This was real. I was being pinned down by whatever the hell this was, and I was feeling like I was being choked. I was finding it hard to breathe. I was finding it hard to keep my eyes open, hearing the gentle tick of the clock in the background all the while. It didn't make sense. The sounds made it like nothing was happening, but the images I was seeing and the feelings I was feeling weren't sinking in my head. I couldn't move, I couldn't do anything, and I became overwhelmed and passed out again. I didn't sleep well, and fortunately woke up with my life the next morning. I overslept. The sound of her alarm was still going on, and I smashed that button and got up hastily. I was already 40 minutes late for class, and my lecturer, I'm sure, was not going to let me in for arriving this late. At this rate, I probably wouldn't even make it to the end of the class. So I cut my losses and just made it to the next one. When I met up with her for lunch, Terry told me that she had a wonderful night's sleep. But just by looking at my face and my clear lack of makeup, it was pretty evident that I had not. She asked what happened, and I looked at her and tried to tell her with my eyes that I didn't want to say. I don't know how to describe it. Was I ashamed of what happened? Was I terrified that I was going insane? Or did I just not believe it? I said, I don't want to talk about it here, and told her to meet me at my apartment in the evening to talk about it. But we spent the remainder of our lunch break having pleasant conversation until it was time to leave. That evening she swung by. She tried telling me that she wanted to sleep over again, just because she hated that house so much. And when she asked what happened last night, I said that I would only tell if she told me first the 100% truth, so that I felt like I wasn't going insane. She agreed, and I unloaded everything that happened that night. I'm surprised her face wasn't shocked that I was either going mad or that something happened. It was just sympathetic. When it came to her turn, she explained everything that happened. Lots of similar circumstances. The black smoke waking her up in the middle of the night, making her feel dizzy, making her fall back to sleep, making her sleep in fear. Always there, always present, and always making her feel on edge. She said that it didn't happen every night, but even when it didn't, she'd always go to bed with a feeling of impending doom, and she'd toss and turn all night, waiting for it to happen, hardly being able to sleep. I knew we had to do something about it. No way I was going to let her stay in that haunted apartment. So we came up with an idea. Even though she had a single bed, we both decided to sleep in her bed the next night, just to see if we'd both experience it. Science and stuff. So that's what we did. We both went over the next night and passed out in her bed. I admit, I found it hard to go to sleep, knowing what could happen. But eventually I managed, of course, and into the land of Nod I fell. Again, at some point during the night, I woke up. I couldn't move. But something was different this time. I could see the light to the bathroom. Now, fortunately, this was just adjacent to her room, so the light shining through the open door was very visible and illuminating for the rest of the apartment. Even though I couldn't move, I felt reassured and calm. But just when I heard her wash her hands, did I see the smoke creature once more. There it was, in the living room, in the darkness. She turned off the light, closed the door, and came closer. I don't even think she noticed that my eyes were wide open. This smoke creature was there, and as she tucked herself in and closed her eyes, the thing got ever closer. I was absolutely soiling myself in fear. The thing was at the doorframe. The thing had passed the dresser, and now it was approaching the bed. I wasn't sure which of us it was going to go for. But that's when it approached me. It must have sensed my fear, or it must have done this to me, to put me in this state. I felt the pressure exert on my arms and legs once more, with Terry next to me, completely unaware of the horrors I was going through. I felt so confused and so hopeless, as the pain from its pressure grew on my arms and legs. I found it hard to breathe. I felt like I was being choked, this time worse than the first. And the saving grace was that the noises I made actually stirred Terry. She turned around lazily and asked if I was okay. And that is when she opened her eyes. She wasn't asleep. She wasn't suffering from sleep paralysis. And she saw this creature in all its smoky glory. I don't think she knew what to do. No words escaped her mouth. But no sooner had she seen the creature, and the creature realized that she had seen it, that it suddenly evaporated, like mist, and was gone like that. My breathing had returned to normal, and she shook me a few times on the shoulder, and after I blinked, I realized that I was able to move, and that I was not asleep. We both looked at each other, and without saying words, we ran to the door. I grabbed my keys from the bowl, and we walked back to my apartment. She stayed with me until the end of her lease, and we used it as a sort of storage space, but never went back in the evening. She and I have remained close friends throughout the years, and only years later did I ever come across the term sleep paralysis. I'm not 100% sure if this qualifies. I'm not even sure what that thing was. We never went back to try and find out. All I know is that the people that suffer sleep paralysis are probably telling the truth. But I don't know if they're suffering from some kind of similar situation as what we had. Is it just in their heads? Or could it be something more? Something tangible and supernatural, invading their thoughts, their dreams, their mind, and slowly driving them insane. Some questions we still don't have the answers to. When I was 15, I enrolled into a program that allowed high schoolers to take classes at the local community college. The credits earned would apply as both high school and college credits. My first semester as part of this program, I took a basic English/creative writing type class, and I was by far the youngest student. My classmates found out pretty quickly that I was a minor, and we were curious why and how I was attending college classes while still in high school. I explained the situation to them, and they were all very nice and accommodating towards me, and I ended up exchanging IM screen names with quite a few of them. One of my classmates, to whom I gave my IM, was a 19-year-old guy called Nick. He was a bit of an odd duck, short and chubby with a sparse beard, and he frequently wore a black cape lined with red on the inside to class. He seemed to be into darker stuff, was a huge fan of vampires and Satanism, and listened to some intense music. I didn't really mind at the time. I was mostly just relieved I had made some friends despite my young age. He began to instant message me on a regular basis pretty quickly. The classroom we were in had computers for each of us, so Nick would often message me during class on those computers. At first, things seemed quite normal. We talked about our interests and hobbies, family, homework, and gossiped about all the other classmates. Pretty soon, though, Nick started bringing up some awkward topics. As a naive 15-year-old girl, that made me uncomfortable. Nick talked about how pretty he thought I was, and would often tell me I looked a few years older than I was. To be fair, I was quite tall for a 15-year-old, and said I acted mature for my age. He asked if I had a boyfriend, and when I told him that I did, he seemed upset and disappointed. He said if I broke up with my boyfriend and dated him, he would treat me like his vampire princess. He told me he wanted to kiss me and touch me everywhere, and that he hoped I would let him bite my neck. I politely yet firmly turned him down every time he brought it up, but he didn't seem to get the hint. Since I was too young for a driver's license, my mum had to pick me up at the college campus and drive me home. Due to her schedule, I usually had to wait for her to pick me up outside of the building my class was held in. Most of the time, I would have to wait about half an hour. Nick started following me out of class and would often wait with me until my mum pulled up. He would pressure me for more personal info and trash talk my current boyfriend. He commented that my boyfriend was probably cheating on me, so I should dump him preemptively. When my mum finally pulled up, I would breathe a sigh of relief and jump into the car. Online, Nick began to become more aggressive. Anytime he messaged me, he would start talking about my body in really inappropriate ways for a 15-year-old. I would repeatedly tell him I didn't like what he was saying, but no matter how hard I tried to steer the conversation away, he would always bring it back to the dirty talk. He told me he didn't mind that I was mostly flat-chested, stating he didn't need more than a handful. He told me I should wear tighter clothing to class, so that he could better imagine what I looked like naked. He mentioned that he frequently fantasized about doing stuff to me while in class, and specifically mentioned bending me over the computer desks. When I was home, I would refuse to respond to his messages if he took it too far. But when we were in class, I had no excuses as to why I wasn't messaging him back. He would sit next to me in class every day, and would send me messages, then stare at me until I replied. If I didn't, he would get upset, and his messages would become more hostile. He would say things like, "Why aren't you responding to me? You know I can see you ignoring me. I thought you were too young and pure to turn into one of those horrible girls, but I guess I'm wrong." The messages would pop up one after another, until I replied. I would often cave and say, "Sorry, I was just paying attention to the teacher, and didn't see your messages." Of course, he'd immediately change his tune, then start right back up with his twisted idea of a romantic conversation. I felt like there was no escaping his barrage of commentary, and I vowed to just stick it out and make it to the end of the semester. I could easily avoid him on campus in the spring. Everything came to a head towards the end of the fall semester. Nick sat next to me in every class, messaged me constantly, and called me weird pet names in front of other people, and would always try to be in physical contact with me. He would put his arm around my shoulders and always wanted to hug me. It made me excruciatingly uncomfortable, but I was too shy and nervous to ask him to stop. I would shrug his arms off my shoulders and try to stick to high fives. When he shrugged me, I would keep my hips as far away from him as possible. I even told one of the mentors at my youth group that there was someone at my college making me feel uncomfortable. At the time, I wasn't sure if I was overreacting, so I asked my youth leader if I could forward him parts of our online conversation that I thought were the most inappropriate. My youth leader's reaction quickly made me realize this was serious, and he explained to me that what Nick was doing was both extremely inappropriate and also potentially illegal. He asked me if I would keep him updated on the situation and to send him any more questionable messages. A couple of days later, Nick messaged me. For some reason on that particular day he was acting extremely forward. He made several of the usual comments about my looks and body, and then started to say how frustrating it was that I was so hot at such a young age. He told me I was too beautiful, and that it drove him crazy seeing me in person. He said something that sent chills down my spine. "You're so sexy and gorgeous. I'd probably still have at you if you were dead." He then went on to describe in great detail how he had this fantasy of sleeping with a girl who either was unconscious or freshly dead. And I mean great detail. I was absolutely horrified, and just sat there staring at the barrage of messages as they popped up. After a few minutes, I was able to snap myself out of my terror stupor and immediately blocked him. I forwarded the messages to my youth leader, who became extremely incensed. He urged me to tell my parents or the campus police so that they could help keep him away from me. He told me that this can be considered a threat, and he wanted me to be safe. He seemed so afraid for me that it actually scared me even more. I told him I would think about telling someone, then signed off I am. Unfortunately, I was young and stupid, and did none of the things that he suggested. I finished my semester and avoided Nick like the plague. No small task, let me tell you. I begged my mum to show up early so that I could leave class and jump right into the car. The first time I did so, she looked behind me and said, "Oh hey, it's your little friend." I turned to see Nick standing outside the classroom building, wearing his black cape and staring blatantly at me. The look on his face was one of cold, furious hatred. I ducked down and shouted, "Please, just drive, Mum." My mother looked at me, concerned, then put the pedal to the floor. I eventually did give my mother a shortened explanation of what happened, leaving out some of the more grotesque details. She made a point to show up before my class ended every day, and waited right outside my building so that I could run out and hop into the passenger side of her car. Fortunately, after he followed me outside a few more times, he seemed to give up. He didn't try to talk to me in class, and didn't follow me outside anymore. I did catch him staring at me a few times in class, but in general, he seemed to take the hint and back off. After that class ended, I never saw or heard from him again, and for that, I am truly grateful. I'm 19 now, but I was 16 at the time. Now, I've always been superstitious, but I never talked about this stuff, because it scares the crap out of me. And I think that anything involving the dead or spirits should be left alone, and not discussed. But anyway, I had a friend of mine who had a dog, and her and her mother were not going to be home that night, so they asked me if I would be kind enough to dog/house sit. Now, I had spent countless nights there, and had never got a bad feeling about the place. There was only one time it was suspect or so, And it was because another one of my friends was doing the same thing as I was some time before, and called me to come stay the night with her, because she was getting a really creepy vibe from the house. But it was a full moon night, so I assumed it was just the effects of that. So anyway, I went over to the house, saw my friend and her mum, and hung out for a while. They left eventually, and it was just me and the dog on the couch watching TV. I did this until it was dark, and at around 8 o'clock at night, I started getting this feeling, like there was something watching me. The house itself is set up so that the master bedroom is a loft, so that it looks out over the main living room, and I found myself continually looking up there. I just ignored it, and eventually got lost in watching the TV again. But God, do I wish I didn't. Around 11 or 12, I decided it was time to hit the hay, and considering I was the only one there, I wanted to sleep in the awesomely comfy master bedroom in the loft. So I went up there and laid down and went to sleep. This is the time that it starts to get scary. As I'm laying there, I start to hear these sounds, like a man talking. Not really anything I could make out, but I've known my head to do these things when I'm trying to go to sleep, so I just ignored it and eventually fell asleep. I woke up around an hour or two later to the same noises, and just when I was trying to get to sleep this time, they were louder and definitely more prominent. I was scared, but I was also tired, so I tucked my head under the blankets and went to sleep. Now this part I'm going to tell you is why I wear a cross around my neck and will no longer spend a night in my friend's house. I was in the bed, on my back, when I woke up for the third time. But when I woke up, there was this feeling in me that I could never describe the feeling to you guys, but the closest I can get would be pure evil. I woke up, and all the most horrible feelings you can have as a human were around me. Like I was just weirded out, and my brain kind of got really alert really fast, but it was like a presence was around me. The next thing I noticed was a pressure on my chest, like someone was sitting on me when I looked up, and I saw no figure, but I could sense where its body was. Then I tried to move my hands and legs, but I couldn't. They were being pinned down by whatever it was that was there with me. I started freaking out and thrashing with all my strength, and it was at that point that I closed my eyes and was able to see it. It was as if he painted his image to the inside of my eyelids, and when they closed, all I could see was a dark, shadowy figure right on top of me, and I felt all these feelings of evil and terror, and I can't even explain it, just get worse. And then that's when it made this noise. This noise was the most guttural, horrible, fear-instilling noise that I've ever heard in my entire life. It was a growl that still to this day, when I think about it, makes me scared, and will always. It is still the one thing from what happened that I've never been able to accurately describe to another person. This all happened in a short second, while my eyes were closed, and when they opened, I went into some type of super strength survival mode. I pushed harder against whatever it was than I ever have in my entire life. Even with that, I wasn't able to overpower it, but this strength did allow me to slide my legs over the edge of the bed. Once most of my legs were off, I felt only the force of it pushing down on my wrists, which I was able to slide my torso off the bed, and when that happened, the pressure of my wrists went away. I got down the stairs as fast as I could and grabbed all of my things and put them in the car and left. I drove down into town and stared at the creek and packed a lip. It was 5 a.m. when all of this happened. I called my friend's mum and told her I had to leave because something happened. I didn't tell her what until I met her at the house when they got back a little bit later that morning. I talked to her about it a couple of days later, and I hadn't noticed, but she said I had all the symptoms of shock when she saw me. But either way, that's why I don't talk about this stuff often, and I'm only telling you because I think it should be heard. I lived in a mid-sized town in nowhere, Texas. It's no Houston, but almost 150,000 people lived here, so it wasn't a super small town either. Now, we were a military town, as in there is a large military base pretty much attached to the city, and a lot of moving around goes on in my town. On average, people who move here either stay here for life or move away in 2 to 4 years. Me and my family moved here when I was in the 8th grade. Since the town is so small, there are only about a dozen elementary schools, 4 middle schools, and only 2 high schools. So chances are you usually pretty much know everyone your age by the time you get to high school. When I moved, I enrolled in the closest middle school, but it was December, so I moved in the middle of the school year, and so everyone had already made their groups of friends. I was also the only kid in my grade that was of Middle Eastern descent, not to mention I was coming down from a northern state of Texas, and due to past bullying, and not to mention I was coming down from a northern state to Texas, and due to past bullying, I had and still have huge social anxiety and awkwardness. I didn't make any friends for a long time. I still remember listening to Eminem on my iPod and eating lunch alone for the first 8th grade, and eating lunch alone for much of the grade, until I made not only the first friend in town, but my first female friend ever. Her name was Maria, and she had lived in this town her whole life. She was of Mexican descent, and we had a similar upbringing, so we got along great. Thanks to her, I found a friend group of my own, in her friends, and she would be kind enough to tell me the details on people around school, like she was telling me who were the good kids, the bad kids, the smart kids, and the like. By the time junior year of high school rolls around, I'm fairly popular, and me and Maria are still friends. She had her own circle, and I had my own, but we still hung out every now and then. Plus, we had a bunch of classes together. One of these classes was competitive choir, so we had class plus after-school training for the choir club. At first, we used to sit wherever we wanted, but we were later arranged by vocal range, or whatever it's called. She was an alto, and I was a bass. If you're into music, you probably know what I'm talking about here. Now, I sat next to a friend of mine, Dave, and the new kid, Zach. I remembered my time alone, and how brutal this town could be, so me and Dave befriended Zach, and soon they were in my group of friends in choir, and Maria now had some other girls, and her friends. Zach was a bit weird. A good-looking kid, but he had a lisp and was shy and barely spoke. When he did speak, it was nothing unusual that I remember. He was a pretty normal guy, except for one conversation where he got really graphic and told us about his fetishes, and the stuff was way too kinky, at least for me at the time, so we just laughed it off. He was also super religious and heavily involved with his church group, and would often text me Bible verses before going to bed. One day, when I had extra time in choir, my friend Dave told me that he had a crush on Maria, and that if I didn't mind I should introduce the two. And they hit it off and were hanging out and going out together, but not together yet. Ah, high school. Anyway, we had a state competition, so we would get to skip the whole school day and go compete, and then our instructor would let us out at the mall and would take us back to school only when it was time to go home. Maria was getting frustrated that Dave hadn't made his move, which I promised he would since we talked about it. So somehow this turns into a group thing. And at the mall, the two of my friends would meet up with Maria and her two friends at the mall for lunch and to hang out after. So me and the boys get talking about which of the girls we're interested in. Dave was with Maria, obviously. Plus, she's a homie, so she was never an option for me. So it was between the other two girls. Zach was awkward and shy, so the choice was up to me. Luckily, I have Maria in my corner, so I asked her about her friends. One was a blonde girl named Alyssa, and the other was a redhead named Samantha. So Maria knows me pretty well, and she tells me that Samantha is into anime and heavy metal. She was also the biggest gamer, but she liked to keep that all on the down low. All stuff I was into, and she told me Alyssa was weird and she was super Christian. So I thought obviously these matches were made in heaven. Me and Maria laughed at how perfect Zach and Alyssa were together, and we exchanged stories in order to determine who was weirder. It was her. Anyway, the night goes well, and eventually we all end up dating the people we were with that night. Samantha and I dated for the rest of junior year throughout summer, and she broke up with me a few weeks into senior year. Honestly, I didn't blame her. Because of my background, I'm not allowed to date, so I had to hide our relationship. And like I said, the city was a moderately small place, so the chances of running into someone I knew, or worse, my parents, were pretty damn high. So we barely ever went out. Plus, she was really attractive and she was a gamer, so her window of opportunity was pretty big. Definitely better dudes than me. Dave and Maria got married, and now even have a kid together. We're still friends to this day. Anyway, Zach was in a lot of my senior year classes. In fact, I would say he was in 6 out of 8. So at first, he was his normal self and we were friends from last year. So I thought I knew him pretty well. But one day he stopped hanging out with me, and he appeared angrier and angrier every passing day. There would be multiple consecutive days where he would just come into class dressed in all black and wouldn't say a word, not even to the teachers. One day when he wasn't there, our English teacher told us that the staff were worried about him, and they reached out to his parents, and they didn't tell us what was going on, but that we shouldn't be mean to him and be very cautious around him. Senior year was about 2 months from being over, when the craziest story starts spreading through the school. Alicia was hospitalized after they found cuts and bruises on her, and she told the authorities that it was Zach. And when we had seen him talking to the police at school the next morning, indeed, his fists were bandaged up, and some people said they saw him crying and confessing. Zach didn't graduate with us. He was moved to some other facility after a few days, and I never saw him again. But my hatred for him had just formed. Fast forward, I went to college in the same town, and nearly all of the kids that decided to continue on to college stayed in the town and went to the same local state university. I dormed for my first semester, but after my awful experience with my drug-addicted first roommate, I moved back with my parents, but due to differences in morals, we drifted apart, and they moved away to another state. My group of friends in college was different from when I was in high school. In fact, only a few of them were from this town, and one of them was Alyssa. Now, she had a real change during the past few years. Understandably, she was in a rebellious phase, so she abandoned Christianity, cut ties with her family, and moved to Montana. She got heavy into drugs. Thanks to my one and only roommate, I was familiar with a lot of drugs, and I myself had become a constant toker. She told us about her family, drugs, and religious issues. She would interrupt conversations to bring up this kind of stuff quite often. It was really weird, and we were all kind of annoyed by her. But because we all knew what she'd gone through, we were nice to her. Besides, Zach was back in town, and we'd all seen him around somewhere. Again, small town. so a visit to Walmart without running into someone you know is unlikely. All the stuff Alyssa randomly brought up were the stuff I can relate to. So one day, I tell her about my own experience with a toxic family. And at this point, I was ex-Muslim, and I also was bouncing around friends' couches, so we had a bit of ground to relate on, and we end up having a nice conversation. Next day I wake up, and she left me a few missed calls at obscure hours, and vague "hi" texts. I didn't respond, I just leave for class. During class I look out the door window, and I can see her walking outside, but I didn't really care, nor see anything weird about that at the time. I've seen myself, so I was pretty confident no one would ever follow me because of my looks, and I wasn't rich or anything, so nothing ever crossed my mind. When I left the room I said hey, and expected us to go our separate ways, but she started walking with me, and she was upset about how I didn't even respond to her. I was taken aback, because, well, people don't usually do this kind of thing, but I apologized and she forgave me. All of a sudden, she starts talking to me about how a number of different things, all within the span of a minute. And then, she started acting like we had been friends for so long. Now, she did go to high school with me, but almost no interaction ever happened. The stuff she was saying was made-up stories about how we used to hang out in high school, and how she would replace her friends with me in a story, or would replace Maria in a story. Maria had told her about me and her. It was all weird stuff. She followed me all the way to my car, and even convinced me to get some coffee with her. Again, knowing what Zach had done to her. I excused myself and went to my friend's house to crash. I ended up showing up pretty late to my buddy's apartment, and he's throwing a party. The usual college stuff. Beer pong, music, talking, dancing, shots and whatnot. So when I show up, I appear on someone's Snapchat story, and she sees it and starts blowing up my phone. I explained to her that I wasn't lying, and that I'm really tired, but he threw a party, and had no obligation to inform me. I am just crashing after all. To make her feel better, I ended up inviting her and spending the entirety of the night with her. We got pretty drunk, and we ended up leaving for her place to spend the rest of the night. I was pretty drunk, but I remember we showed up. I asked her to charge my phone, and just passed out on her bed in her one-bedroom apartment. When I woke up I'm fully clothed, and I can tell pretty obviously that my little friend down below has not seen some action that night. But Alicia was pretty much naked except for her lower garments. She insists that we had, and that we had to be in a relationship now. I tell her that I don't have feelings for her like that, and she begins to cry, and I consolidate her. But when her tears mix with the option of getting in to move in with her, I selfishly agree, because I was tired of jumping couches. Plus, I know she's a good person who's just gone through some bad stuff, right? I tell her I needed to get to class, and that I'll pick up my stuff from my friend's house, and would meet her back in her apartment later that day. All of a sudden, I get a text from Maria. We probably hadn't spoken in a year or so, and she had seen on Facebook that I was now in a relationship with Alicia, which suspiciously was posted at 4 AM. Now, I don't know how Facebook works, but I'm pretty sure that both parties have to agree to post the new relationship. What's weirder is that it was done from my account, so the post was mine, meaning she probably used the fingerprint lock on the phone when I was sleeping. Sent herself the request, and then accepted it from her device, which was possible since I gave her my phone to charge, since the charger was on her side of the bed. Or maybe she had seen my password at some point. I doubt I wouldn't have woken up. Maria tells me that Alicia is crazy, and that she wants to meet up to talk about it. So I show up to Maria and Dave's place, and Zach was there. Apparently, he had gotten back in touch with Dave after graduation, and they were all living together for now. Zach tells me that she has bipolar disorder, and he starts listing off a number of crazy things she had done to him. The craziest of which were, she killed his dog with her car when he tried to break up, and then accused his mum of pushing the dog into the car. She would occasionally wake Zach up in the middle of the night with a knife to his throat and would threaten to slit it if he didn't admit to whatever she was accusing him of. She beat up his 15-year-old sister. She told lies about him to his parents. She told teachers at school that he was bullying her into staying with him, but didn't want the teachers doing anything about it. Later, she got even crazier and told Zach he couldn't talk to other girls, and that if he did, she would kill him. She told him she knew where he lived, and where his mum worked, and where his other dogs were, so he should listen to her. She would only do this privately, obviously, and wasn't always like that, and he told me she was pretty normal for the most part, but during her bouts of craziness, they'd last longer and longer every time they happened. The craziest story he told me was that when he was seriously trying to break it off with her, she threatened to kill herself if he didn't stop talking to suspicious people. And to her, that included everyone, including me. When I asked him about the night he beat her up, he tells me that he was attempting to break up with her, and he had gotten further than he had ever gone before, and he thought he'd finally done it, after an hour or so of arguing. But then she showed back up at his place and outside on his lawn, and put a knife to her own throat, and said she would do it if Zach didn't punch his dad's truck. An odd request, and Zach didn't do it. But when he saw that she was pressing down on the knife, he punched the car with a little bit of force, basically tapped it, but this drove her insane, and she started cutting herself in a few places, screaming for him to punch, and then put the knife back in her throat and poked a little hole that drew some blood, which was enough for Zach to panic and punch the truck, fracturing his hand. He said that as soon as that happened, without even saying a word, she left. Zach's parents took care of the hand and weren't at their house when the police arrived, but at a relative's, and Zach was still newish, so nobody told him about Alicia accusing him of assault. In fact, he nor his parents knew, since they spent the night at their relative's house. He didn't know until he was talking to the cops the next morning at school. Also, Zach's parents were informed as soon as they got to work, because the cops showed up looking for them. Eventually, Alicia's parents and Zach and his parents had a meeting at school. Zach told me that Alicia's parents had promised to keep her away from him, and told them that they would move right after high school and take her with them to Montana if Zach and his parents didn't press any charges. The police believed Zach, because the doctors knew immediately that the bruises and cuts were self-inflicted. Plus, she already had a known and registered mental condition, so the authorities chose to believe Zach and his parents, fearing he would get bullied at school because of the incident, and decided to put him in an accelerated program so that he could graduate before us and choose not to walk the stage, while Alicia had actually gone to a mental health facility to avoid any more police involvement, but her parents pulled her out immediately after. Anyway, he gives me her parents' number and tells me I should probably give them a call right away. But I decided that I would let her down gently but firmly tonight, and if she got too crazy I would call her parents. Because the story could be made up, and I'm still a bit suspicious of Zach at this point. But when I opened my phone, multiple of my friends had texted me, telling me that some girl was showing up and demanding to see me, saying that she was my girlfriend and threatening them. I decided that I would call them now, while I was with Zach, who I believed now. I reached her mum, who I had a conversation with, but she basically tells me the story of how they found out she had bipolar, which was pretty crazy in itself. She confirms Zach's story, and she tells us that Alyssa's older than 18, so they have no power over her, plus they can't do anything thousands of miles away. When I ask if she could talk to Alyssa for me, she flat out refuses and says, "Trust me, It's better if I don't get involved, especially for you. So clearly she wasn't any help, and I'm pretty sure she hasn't done anything illegal yet, besides yell threats, so I don't think the cops would have interfered either. Eventually Zach advises me, since there's nothing she really has on me, I'm not close with my family, nor do they live nearby, and that she doesn't know where I am now, nor will she know, because I am actually homeless, in a sense that blocking her and ignoring her would be a best option. If I were to have any interactions with her, they had to be in public, which was fine, since my school was the only place she knew I'd be. Maria mentions that Alicia didn't have good enough GPA in high school to attend the school I'm attending, and with some investigation from all the friends she and I were around, none of us had her in any class. After that, I told campus security about her and shared my experiences with them, and they told me that she indeed was not a student and that they would look out for her. Me and Zach, the guy I thought was the antagonist, ended up becoming roommates for 2 years, and we even moved to a different state together. I heard she was arrested at some dude's house because she pulled a knife on the guy, and her parents had to bail her out and took her back to Montana. Alicia, let's never meet again, and I hope you get the help you so desperately need. Sleep paralysis. I've had it since I was maybe 7 or 8, and am now 19. It used to be an episode or 2 a month, but now it's multiple a night. I'm used to it now, but regardless of how many times it's happened to me, there's always new feelings with it. Sleep paralysis, in general, isn't what scares me, but the out-of-body experience that one can achieve while doing so. I had my first OBE when I was 14, and the only key thing I remember from that is leaving my body, going down the stairs in my house, and seeing my mother bringing groceries. Now that sounds normal for any average family, but my mother is a homeless drunk who would rather get free brews and sleep under a bridge than have a family and responsibilities. This gets even weirder, because the other 3 OBs I've had all showed my mum doing weird chores in the house. Dishes, laundry, vacuuming. I wish I could have more OBs to understand what my mind is trying to tell me. I've always assumed it was to let go of the hope that I have for my mother of being a responsible person. This took place about 8 or 9 years ago. So one day I'm chilling on Facebook, and I get a friend request from a guy called Andy. At first, I don't really think anything of it. I never add people I don't know anyway, so I ignore it for a few days. Then, I get a notification saying that I still had the pending friend request. So I look at the guy's profile and see that he has the same last name as my friend Rick's sister-in-law. I asked my friend Rick if he was family, and he said that it was his sister-in-law's cousin. I thought it was a little weird that he wanted to add me as a friend, but whatever, no biggie. I didn't want to offend my friend, so I added him. Huge mistake. Now, I am a huge Harry Potter fan. I remember posting on my Facebook page that I was going to the midnight release of the new movie and being super excited to go with all of my friends. Well, fast forwarded to the night of the movie, and I'm there with my best friends, and I see this guy staring at me. I think, huh? Weird. But I was really excited about the movie that I didn't even give him a second thought. Once we got into the theatre, we sit down, and I see this guy sit right in front of us. So we watch the movie, and this guy keeps turning around to look at me. I start to get really annoyed because he was distracting me from the movie, and I whisper, "What?" as meanly as I could, with a very WTF face. He turns around and leaves me alone for the rest of the movie. When the movie is over, my best friend and I are walking out of the theatre, talking about how amazing the movie was, when I see the same guy standing by my car. When I walk up to my car, it hit me that I'd seen the guy before. He's the guy I added on Facebook. So my automatic thought is, oh, maybe he just wants to meet me because I'm Rick's friend. I slow my footsteps down a few feet from my car before we reach him. He didn't say anything at first, so my friend and I look at each other like, what does this guy want? So I say, "Hi, do I know you?" And he goes, "Not yet. I'm Andy." Then he steps forward and hands me an envelope. Okay, this is getting weird. Then he seemed really excited and said, "Open your present." I say, no thanks, and attempt to hand him back the envelope. But this guy just walks away, leaving me with my hand sticking out of the air towards him. My friend starts awkwardly laughing and grabs the envelope out of my hand, saying, "Ooh, someone has a crush on you." I'm just kind of standing there a little spooked, like I don't know who the hell this guy is. So my best friend opens the envelope, and it's a 5-page letter about how he feels about me, and about how beautiful I am, that he loves reading my stuff on social media, and a $50 gift card to Starbucks. My friend stops laughing when she looks over and sees that I do not find it funny at all. I text Rick, asking him if this is some kind of joke he's playing on me. He assured me that he had no clue what I was talking about. Then Rick tells me he barely even talked to Andy, because he was a weird dude. Oh, now let me tell you. So I go home and delete him from Facebook. I rip up the 5-page note and give the gift card to my friend. In my mind, since I couldn't give the gift back, I wouldn't use it, so I wouldn't feel like I owed him anything. Things started escalating pretty quickly once I graduated high school and was getting ready to move. See, I lived in a small town, and I was getting ready to move to California to live with my dad. Once I moved, I started to get texts and phone calls from an unknown number. I finally answered one day, and the person on the other end says, "Oh hey, it's Andy. I miss you so much," and my heart feels frozen. It was so scary, because I had no idea how he got my number. I politely ask him to leave me alone and hang up before he can say anything else. I quickly go to change my phone number, thinking, oh, this will stop him. But things actually got worse. I started to get packages in the mail. Things like a Harry Potter beanie, a Doctor Who jacket, and flowers. I got flowers from him almost every week delivered to my door. I got a letter that asked if I would go to Italy with him, that he would pay for everything with no strings attached. Then the cherry on top was that he went to New York and saw Daniel Radcliffe's play and got his autograph and picture with him, and he sent them to me. I threw the picture out, but kept the autograph. Then the phone calls started again. Like, how the hell did this guy obtain my number? I finally picked up the phone and told him to stop sending me stuff. I told him I was throwing everything away. I didn't want or need anything from him. I told him he made me feel extremely uncomfortable. He didn't like that very much, and he basically said, "You're in a bad mood today. and quickly hung up. The next time he called, I told him I would contact the police if he kept calling. Things settled a little bit. A few months went by, but then I got together with my now husband, who lived in that little town. Of course, I moved back. I remember the first time I saw Randy when I got back. It was at a shopping centre. He looked over at me for a second and then quickly started walking towards me. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up, and I turned around and quickly left the store without looking behind me. While all of this is happening, I reconnect with my sister, who, due to some family drama, I hadn't spoken to in about 3 years. Turns out she was the one who told Andy about my phone number, as I always kept her updated on my address or phone numbers in case of an emergency, and she was the one who gave him my address. I was almost mad enough at her to stop talking to her again, but she told me that he would message her on Facebook, and that he was my boyfriend, and he lost my number, or he wanted to send me a surprise. He also asked her if she would be okay with him asking to marry me. With us not talking, she had no idea that this wasn't true. Apparently, he can be a pretty charming liar. Anyway, she promises to not give him any more information about me, and blocks him on Facebook as well. So at this point in my life, I'm with my now husband, then boyfriend, and we have plans to get married soon. We are very excited, and we tie the knot at the courthouse. Fast forward a week of being married, and my husband gets a Facebook message from Andy. It was basically asking him if he was willing to share me. He offered to take us to dinner to discuss the situation. My husband was all for going for a free meal, and them beating the crap out of this guy. But I didn't even want to look at him, let alone my now husband go to jail over me. So we ignore it. The big blow up, and how this story ends, for now, and hopefully forever, is that he found out where I work. He came in one day, and I had no choice but to help him. And he started to take pictures of me on his phone, in front of customers and my co-workers. I lost it on this guy, and I started screaming at him to leave me alone, and if he ever came near me or contacted me again, I would have him arrested. I honestly can't even remember all of what I said. I was shaking and almost started crying. Luckily, my boss was really cool about the whole thing, and I didn't even get in trouble for swearing in front of the customers. Anyway, his face was priceless. Totally shocked. He just slowly put his phone in his pocket and left. That was the last interaction I've had with him. It's been years, and I'll sometimes see him walking by my work, but he would just quickly look at me and then keep walking. As for why I never actually went to the cops, I was young and dumb and thought that I could handle it, which I did, but I am very lucky. If it had gotten any worse, I definitely would have gone to the police. I'm not sure why he acted like this towards me, or what I did to cause this to happen. Maybe he's just mentally unstable. Either way, I'm always on alert because of this guy. Last weekend, I had the same dream Saturday and Sunday night. I've had an attachment in the past, so I know what it feels like to be in the presence of a negative entity. During the dream I encountered, that same negative feeling was able to fight back or hold off that feeling with my own energy. It was really terrifying to confront this negative energy / entity head on in the dream, because in real life, I always run from it. Towards the end of the nightmare, I start hearing my bedroom door rattle and shake like someone was trying to get in. After a while, I became fully aware of what's going on around me. but I can't wake up, and someone is still messing with the door, like they can't quite figure out how to use the doorknob. I ended up drifting off to sleep, and when I finally wake up, my bedroom door is open. Sunday night. I made sure that I shut and latched the door all the way. I have the same dream and sleep paralysis experience, and when I wake up, my door is open. My grandma recently passed, and my mum brought her ashes here, but removed them from the house shortly after, because weird things started happening, along with a foul, sulphury smell that moved through the house. She had thoroughly cleansed the house with sage, black salt, and obsidian. I think whatever she cast out was trying to get back in through me that last weekend. A while back, my sister Emma told the family she had this terrifying sleep paralysis, and she saw a white humanoid creature with black eyes looking at her from the foot of her bed. She never had sleep paralysis before, and hasn't had it since. Now after this incident, my other sister's boyfriend John had the same exact sleep paralysis, with the same creature on the same night. Except this time, he had a dream where he saw the monster running into Emma's house the night she had the incident. At this point, they had no way of communicating with each other, so they couldn't have planned out this as a prank. I didn't believe it either, but they both sounded genuinely terrified when they talked about this experience. I really haven't been able to come up with any explanation. They hadn't seen any scary movies or anything that would bring up this creature, and it's still a mystery to us all. After getting out of a serious relationship, I made a profile on a dating site where I was contacted by Mike. He sent a message admiring a shirt I was wearing in one of my photos that featured Lydia Dietz from Beetlejuice, Wednesday Addams, and Nancy from The Craft. According to his profile, he and I shared interests in photography and campy horror, so I agreed to meet him at a Cindy Sherman exhibition at a local art museum. He was nervous from our initial meeting and kept bumping into me as if he lacked spatial awareness. I tried to be as chill as possible, hoping it would put him at ease, but everything I said just seemed to make him more nervous. His intense stares were starting to make me feel uncomfortable, and I tried to lose myself in the crowd so that I could at least enjoy the exhibition on my own, but he kept hunting me down, trying to make small talk. At some point I said, "Look, dude, I'm a huge dork. There's no reason for you to be so nervous." His eyes widened and said, "You're just so gorgeous." And he kept comparing me to Aubrey Plaza, Kate Micucci, among other ambiguously ethnic brunettes. I thought he looked like William Dafoe as a fake Mexican drug lord, but I didn't feel it necessary to tell him that. I excused myself to the restroom, but he followed, so I rushed off saying, "I gotta poop." He later commented that he thought it was so adorable that I had to poop. Nothing I could say to him could turn off this guy. If I were to pick my boogers and snack on them, he'd probably ask if he could eat some too. After the exhibit, we did the typical, "It was nice meeting you, but not really," awkward goodbye. I was wearing a high-necked dress with a partially open back, and he rubbed his hand on my bare skin very creepily before I pushed him away. Then he dug out a container of pink Hello Kitty cookies from his bag, proudly proclaiming that he had baked them for me, as if I were an 8-year-old. They tasted so nasty, even my housemate, who loves gross crap like candy corn, refused to eat them. Later that night, when I thought I was home safe. While I was in bed, I got a text from him, telling me that he had fun and wanted to hang out soon, because the guy was clearly delusional. I did not respond, so he texted, "You must be sleeping." The next day, he started sending me photos of random women, telling me I looked like them. The message would say, "I saw your twin today," or "I didn't know you did modeling," or "You have a new movie coming out? Do you want to see it with me?" I didn't respond, so he texted, "You must be busy." But that didn't stop him from sending me 20 more messages. In the final, most desperate one, he admitted that he told his sister we were dating and begged me to go to dinner at her house because she wanted to meet me. He was trying to guilt trip me into going with him because he lied to his family. I called his number and he answered on the first ring. I shouted down the line, "I am not your girlfriend and I am not even your friend. I'm blocking your number, so don't bother trying to contact me again," unintentionally spitting out rhymes under duress. He said he didn't want me to be mad at him and asked if I could give him another chance because he was really nervous the first time we met. I said I wasn't interested, so he asked for a reason. I told him honestly that his behavior creeped me out. We'd just met and you're already telling your family we're in a relationship? You don't think that's weird? He was silent on the other end, so I told him to seriously please not contact me again. I thought I was safe from his advances, until I ran into him a few months later when I was jogging through the neighborhood. He came up to me and waved. "Hey, remember me? We had fun at the museum." Scared to see him so close to where I lived, I questioned, "Are you stalking me?" He shook his head, then started waiting for me to say something, but I took off running. Every time I'd see someone who significantly resembled him, I would freak out. Several months later, I got a message on Facebook. We were not friends on there, saying that he missed me and wondered if we could be friends. He attached a poorly drawn cartoon that was supposed to be of me. It looked nothing like me or Aubrey Plaza or Kate Micucci for that matter, and suggested I make it my Facebook profile picture. I deactivated any online accounts associated with my real name, changed my phone number, and moved to the woods where the reception sucks. But at least he'll never be able to find me. I hope. I stayed at a friend's house about 3.5 months ago, and this is when it first started. We ate dinner and watched the Golden Girls before crashing out. I told her I was ready for bed and headed to the guest room. She asked if I would leave the door open because her cat likes to go in there, and if I didn't, he'd scratch the door. So I left it open. I didn't mind though because the living room light was on, and it was comforting me since I've never slept there before. Okay, so I'm sleeping, and I get woken up by the cat jumping on the bed and across my back. He doesn't actually land on me. I'm laying face down and don't think anything of it. Then I felt something else move across my back, in a very similar fashion to how the cat felt jumping over me. But it was going in the same direction as the cat. I hear the cat meow and hiss, and then I hear it, in a little girl's voice. "I want to get up there too." I tried to jump up, but I couldn't move. I was in complete panic and couldn't move. Something pushed across my back again, and then the cat hisses again and jumps after whatever was there. I have never been more scared in my life. I felt paralyzed, and not by fear, but by a pressure holding me down. I am not a religious person, but I started praying and getting a little emotional. Finally, I fell back asleep. I had to be up around 6 a.m. the next day to go to work, and my alarm went off as planned. My friend, who was in the other room, yells and asks if I'm awake. I get up to go to her room and tell her good morning, and she asks how I slept, so I told her not that great. She replies that neither did she. I told her that I kept having dreams about a demonic little girl in my room. This completely freaked her out, and she told me that she had the same thing. She grew up in that house, and she said she'd never had anything like that happen. While I was getting ready for work, the cat that saved me would not leave my side. He literally laid on my feet while I did my makeup. I am not a fan of cats, but trust me, it was very welcomed that he didn't leave me. I've had 2 more episodes where I hear voices and wake up in a panic. I'm not sure if the last 2 are just nightmares, but it's scaring me and making it difficult to want to go to sleep. I feel like she's following me. I was living by myself and sleeping on an air mattress. It was morning and light out, and I woke up to the sound of my apartment front door opening, then furniture being moved. I heard the wires being unplugged from my computer, as someone was stealing it and hauling it away. I heard banging in the kitchen and the cabinets opening, footsteps, and then the door to my bedroom open as I lay on my back staring at the ceiling. Then I heard an unbelievably loud gunshot, and then I felt a deep sinking sensation. I thought my air mattress was deflating from being shot. Either that, or I was actually experiencing the feeling of dying. Sleep paralysis. The audio hallucinations are incredibly vivid. You're on your back, unable to move, with your eyes wide open, dreaming. I must have fallen back asleep for a while after that, and later bolted awake and rushed out to my living room to find nothing stolen. I had an episode recently where I was aware that I was having sleep paralysis and told my husband next to me that I couldn't move and was having trouble breathing. He put his hand on my shoulder and told me I was going to be fine. I was just dreaming, and that I would wake up soon. I was able to move my hand and touch his, but his hand wasn't there. I snapped awake and realized he wasn't there at all. The experience was so real, it was haunting. Sleep paralysis plagues me all the time. It's more common in migraine sufferers, but it's genuinely given me some of the freakiest experiences of my life. I get where alien abduction stories come from. They were probably experiencing sleep paralysis. At the time this occurred, I was 16. The girl mentioned was 21 going on 22. I met her working at my first job. It was a seasonal one, thankfully. During my first 2 weeks there, she would stare at me and follow me around the rooms. I would go to the bathroom, and she'd knock on the door or text me and say she'd missed me. We exchanged numbers for business purposes, and I found this strange, but I knew that she had a minor mental disability, so I didn't want to be mean and just brushed it off. After about a month into the job, she asks me to hang out at the nearby park after work. I agreed, because I was going to be going somewhere next door to there, and not only was I afraid of saying no and then promptly running into her, but I also didn't see her as any sort of threat. So we met in the park. I was wise enough to have a friend join me though, who stayed nearby in case I needed someone, and just get to talking. She starts telling me how beautiful I am and tries to hold my hand. Weirded out, I pulled my hand away and thanked her for the compliment without saying much else. She had gotten a new Jeep that she was really proud of, as she had been saving for it for 2 years, so she asked if I wanted to see it. I said sure, and followed her to the parking lot. Keep in mind that it was daytime, and there were people everywhere, and I was in immediate contact with my friend, so I wasn't afraid. This was in the heat of summer, and it was around 95 Fahrenheit outside. So when she asked if I wanted to sit in the aircon, I went to hop in the front, but she headed to the back. I slowly followed and kept my hands on the handle, which I made sure was unlocked the whole time. At first she sat with her legs across from me and talked normally, but slowly kept moving closer. Then she laid her head in my lap, very suddenly, and I didn't know how to react. I didn't touch her. I just sat there in shock and started talking about random work-related topics. She said she didn't want to talk about work and instead wanted to talk about us. She told me that she really liked me and started showing me random pictures of lesbian couple goals off Pinterest and telling me how she wanted that to be us. I said that I should leave and went to open the door when she tried to forcefully kiss me. I moved my face away and she missed. So I got out of the car and said that I needed to leave and ran inside the store with my friend and was freaking out. It doesn't end there. Not only does this girl follow me into the store, but is referring to me as baby and smiling like nothing uncomfortable had happened. I told her that me and my friend needed to leave, and we rushed out. All the while she yelled at me to see her again soon all the way up to the car. For the rest of the job, which was the rest of summer, she would text me almost daily that she was in love with me and wanted me. She gave me notes at work, putting them in my purse and jacket, and started telling our co-workers that we were dating when we absolutely weren't. As soon as the job ended, I blocked her number, only for her to get a new one and text me from there. Blocked again. Then she proceeded to get those weird emails to text services online and started texting me from there. I blocked every account she made. She added me on social media through contacts, and I blocked all of the accounts she made, but she kept on making more. I then found out through another co-worker that she had a boyfriend of 3 years and was trying to cheat on him with me. I confronted her about this and told her to leave me alone. For more than 2 years after this, she would text me every few weeks to every few months from a new account to try and win me over. Then I ran into her at my new job, and she started showing up at every event that my new job hosted and would not leave me alone during them, following me everywhere, begging for me to call her. All the while my bosses watched in confusion and I had to explain myself. I eventually quit that job, and I haven't seen her since. She's tried talking to me, but stopped last year when I got into a new relationship with my current boyfriend. I'm sure, though, that this probably isn't the last I'm going to hear from her. The scariest thing that's ever happened to me was the following. I often suffer from sleep paralysis. If you don't know what it is, from my understanding, it's when you suddenly wake up from REM sleep, the dreaming part, and your brain hasn't quite connected back your body, so you can't move, but you're awake. It's often accompanied by the feeling of something in the room with you. I believe it's also triggered by stress. The first time I had it, I had woken up lying on my stomach, and I had thought the door to my room had opened, and someone had been standing there. At first I thought it was my dad, but then as this person stood there watching me from the doorway, I realized it wasn't my dad. I had a small collection of knives I had picked up from different parts of the world, and one of them was right by my bed. But when I couldn't reach out to grab it, I realized what was happening, and it wasn't so scary. Another time it happened was when I was in a new room in my old house's basement. When I woke up, I couldn't place exactly what woke me up, but after a moment I couldn't sense anything. I don't exactly know how to describe it, how I could sense it. I couldn't see anything, smell anything, or hear anything, but I knew that there was something in there on the ceiling. Some sort of creature that was half snake, half man, that was slithering on the ceiling, and I could sense it watching me. That was kind of scary. But when I came out, it just vanished from my senses, and everything was normal. A few months ago, I had the scariest moment of my life. I woke up as my blackout curtains shifted a little bit, letting in more light into the room. Not a big deal. There's a vent underneath it, and I'm super sensitive to light when I'm sleeping, and it shifted back almost immediately. Just a little light will wake me up. But then I heard a voice say, "Ah, the dark." I tried to turn towards it, but I couldn't move. But as soon as I tried, I felt something jump on top of me. It was kneeling on my right arm, and pinned my other arm, and it started choking me, and shaking me, and shouting in my ear, "The darkness will be eternal. The light will never come forth." Just over and over. I have no idea how long this lasted. I was absolutely terrified. There was even enough light that I could see everything in the room. But I couldn't see what was on top of me, even though I can feel this thing breathing on my ear as it's shouting, and I can feel its hand grabbing my throat and other arm. I couldn't even shout for help. All that was coming out of my own throat were just groans and gasps that I could barely make out myself. I was trying to call for help, hoping to God that one of my roommates could hear me. Eventually I just said, "Jesus." Only I couldn't say that many syllables at once, so it was more like, "Jesus." And then nothing. I could move again, and I could sit up. Running to the light switch, flipping on all the lights, and opening the blackout curtains. It was suddenly just over, but it took some time for my heart to calm down. It took me an hour for me to make myself believe it was just sleep paralysis, and go back to sleep. The next day I told everyone what happened, trying to turn it into just another story, so that it wouldn't be such a big deal anymore. I was, and still am, an extremely shy person. I'm the person with the headphones in, hoodie up, ignoring most people. That girl with the stutter and shy mumbling. I don't speak out and don't draw attention to myself, but that tends to attract the strangest people and the scariest guys. I had a huge crush on one of the really hot cool guys in school. Sweet talker and a nerd. I hung out a lot, and he introduced me to his group of friends. That's where I met him. Tall perv. He was the strangest guy in the group. I mean, they were all pretty weird, but he stood out. He was very tall and had a flash drive around his neck 24/7. And he was very touchy-feely with his hands. Nickname, Tall Perv. I met him and he was already acting strange around me. The bell rang for us to go head back to class after lunch, but he had other ideas. He decided to pick me up by the breast and had me standing up. I didn't speak a lot, but I shrieked. He dropped me and said it's okay because I'm cute. He said, "Don't worry, I didn't mean anything, but it could if you wanted to." I ran back inside, terrified and confused. My crush pushed him away and was yelling at him. Neither one of them came after me. I still hung out with my crush again, but he was still hanging out with this guy and his short friend on another day. So I went up and tried to talk to my crush, overhearing Tall Perv talk about porn. He bragged about his flash drive full of it, the one he always wore. My crush looked annoyed as hell, but jumped at the chance of being with me. Many months later, I was heading to class that was in a different building, when suddenly I felt a hand up my arse. It was him again, laughing like it was a game. I had a textbook in hand and started hitting him as hard as I could, yelling and screaming at him. His face fell and he took off. I finally got rid of him, right? I did. Then he graduated. He never touched me again, but it doesn't end sadly. He found me on Facebook years later. At this time I'd forgotten his name and face. He didn't have a picture of him in his profile, so I added him like, "Oh, someone from high school. Cool." After I broke up with my then boyfriend, not my crush, but someone else, guess who popped up onto my phone? Tall perv. Same day. He began texting me every day, saying how he missed me and wanted to hang out. I got onto Facebook and saw that 90% of my posting of memes he had liked and commented. I posted a ton of memes daily, and he liked almost all of them. And my notifications were all from him, messages and likes. I looked at the profile and recognized him. He was begging to hang out, and one day out of the blue, he started sending pictures of his junk. I was shocked and kind of scared, so I decided to block him on Facebook. The end? No. I got a text message from my cell phone. Now very, very few people from high school had my cell phone. "Hey, it's me. You want to hang out? Come on, I miss you. We can come bake and cook at my house. I know you like sweets. We can make a cake. I know you live in this certain part of town, and it's not that far." He was correct. But how did he know where I lived? "Please, let's hang out. I can buy you lunch." I ignored his messages until he started calling me. He was crying and saying how lonely he was. He wanted me to go to his house and comfort him. He spammed his address at me, and I finally blocked his ass on my phone too. A year later, I got another message from him on a different number, and I blocked that one as well. He was a perv, and definitely still was. But he went on a whole nother level with stalking and begging. Remember, this went on for years. A close friend of mine recently warned everyone on Facebook about this guy because he picked up a scared female friend from his house. He had apparently lured a girl to his house and attempted to assault her. She fled before he could grab her. She had not filed any charges as far as I was aware of. All that I do know is that I don't want to see that guy again. If I do, it better be a mugshot. This is what I texted my mum at 1:24 last night. I don't know how else to say this. I saw demons in my room just now. They attacked me. I'm seriously scared. I was asleep, and I had this really weird dream filled with witches, candlelight swamp rituals. Matthew, my middle brother, was there, and we were running around this town chasing each other to find our lost bikes. I thought I found him, but it was a deformed man. I was driving my car. Then more came out. Hundreds in this run-down part of town. They stalled out my car and broke the windows. They clawed at me and began pulling me from the car, saying that they were here to kill me. When I awoke, I saw two things holding me down. I couldn't see faces, but they had arms, legs, and bodies. Their skin was wispy, like smoke, and looked like those fancy dress socks with patterns. I couldn't move. Then they backed away from me and disappeared like smoke. Then all around my room I saw writing and what looked to be masks all over the place. They then disappeared in a similar fashion. I ran out of the room, my heart pounding, and I'm on the smoke deck. I've never seen or felt anything like that. I can feel where they held onto my ankle, and it still feels like someone is gripping me. My sleep paralysis was traumatizing. I still get chills when I think about it. The only reason I didn't jump up screaming in absolute terror was that I knew what sleep paralysis is. I'm pretty sure it was a demon. It was the voice of my mother screaming my name in absolute terror, while I heard crashes and explosions and some kind of demonish/hellish background noise. I do not wish the experience I had to my worst enemy, and I still can't grasp how terrifying it was.